Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 355. Unveiling the Past. The boundless desert with its searing heat shimmered with wavering mirages. A massive sealed tent stood pitched in the middle of that vast emptiness. Outside, a solar panel leaned against a post soaking up the relentless sun. A fair distance away, an advanced outdoor air conditioning unit hummed steadily. Anyone who stumbled upon the scene might have thought they were tourists vacationing on Earth rather than survivors scraping by in the sea of death. Inside the tent, Ryan, Dot, and Dot's mother were enjoying the cool air drifting from the vents. Each of them held a thick slice of ice-cold watermelon, biting into it with audible satisfaction. Dot's eyes curved into little crescents as if this moment, watermelon fresh air, a brief reprieve, was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. They'd even indulged in the luxury of rinsing their faces and hair with clean water, a rare blessing in the desert. As they ate, Ethan couldn't help glancing at Dot's mother from time to time. Aside from her slightly darker skin, her features were strikingly elegant. He shifted uncomfortably, then decided to break the silence. "Uncle Jed, this thing. Is it yours?" Ethan pulled the Bloodline map fragment from his pack and set it gently on the table. Uncle Jed's body went rigid. His hand lifted as if to touch it, but halfway there he stopped. He pulled back and exhaled slowly. "It used to be," he said, his voice rough. "Tell me about it," Ethan urged, curiosity piqued. Uncle Jed hesitated, searching for the right words. After a moment he nodded. The Bloodline map was split into 5 pieces, he began. 4 are hidden across the cities of the Sea of Death. No one knows where the 5th ended up. He paused, his eyes fixed on the fragment. "This piece originally belonged to the Forgotten City. I took it when eventually tribe leader Butcher found me half dead and brought me back to his camp. But when I woke up, the map was gone." Ethan frowned. "You think he took it?" "I did at first," Jed admitted. "Butcher always denied it. He said he hadn't found anything else when he rescued me. And he treated me kindly after that. Gave me food, a place to stay. Over time I let it go. Maybe I just grew too tired to care." His gaze turned distant. "For years I followed the Butcher tribe as they migrated. I'd set up camp, hunt, look for water. That was my life. Until yesterday, when you showed up and turned everything upside down." He didn't say more about who he really was. Something told Ethan that Uncle Jed's past was more complicated than he let on. But if he didn't want to talk, Ethan wouldn't press. Just as the story ended, a cold metallic voice echoed in Ethan's mind. Ding. System notification. Main quest triggered. Blood King's trial. Gather the map fragments. Bloodline map fragment, January 5th. Reward. Bloodline mystery clue ×1. Ethan rubbed his temple. A clue as a reward? What kind of lousy prize is that? He sighed inwardly. How long will this trial take? Collecting all 5 fragments? That's absurd. The 5th one is missing altogether, and the others are in the hands of the Sea of Death's most powerful factions. Even if I get 3 more, that's still only 4 pieces. He exhaled and looked at Jed. "Uncle Jed, do you know where exactly we are in the Sea of Death right now?" Jed shook his head. "Hard to say. In this desert, maps are precious. Usually only a tribal chief has even a rough regional chart. The Butcher tribe's map probably burned up in that fire last night." Ethan clenched his jaw. Great, he thought. No map, no positioning device, just endless dunes. Perfect. At least he still had supplies. If they ran out, he might not last long out here. "If we keep heading west," a quiet voice interrupted, "we'll reach Beastfall City in about 7 days. Dot's mother had been silent until then. Now she sat with her back straight, her expression calm. Uncle Jed looked up sharply. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes." Without warning, she rose from her chair, stepped forward, and slowly sank to her knees before Ethan. The motion startled him. He jumped to his feet, but she pressed her palms to the ground and lowered her head. "Clear Spring City's Nora Vance thanks you," she said firmly, "for killing that beast. Tribe leader Butcher." Her forehead touched the floor with a hollow thud. Ethan hurried over and tried to pull her up. "Wait, Nora. Please," he faltered, unsure how to address her. Miss Nora didn't feel right, not when she had a child as old as Dot. Uncle Jed stepped closer, his eyes wide. You're from Clear Spring City? The Vance family?" She looked up, her face composed. "Yes." Ethan glanced between them. "Then how did you end up in the Butcher tribe? You even married a butcher?" Uncle Jed's tone carried a mixture of surprise and something like respect. Ethan realized the Vance family must hold some serious influence. Nora's mouth curved into a bitter smile. Fate plays cruel tricks on people. She sat back on her heels, her voice steady despite the rawness in it. 8 years ago I argued with my father. I was too proud, too angry. So I hid in a caravan leaving Clear Spring City for Beastfall City. I thought I'd prove something, I don't even remember what anymore. Her hands curled into her skirt. But on the 9th trail we were ambushed. Bandits. They robbed everything. Our fresh water supplies. The escorts thought their reputation would protect them. They didn't even bother to send scouts ahead. Arrogance killed them. Her gaze turned flat. They were slaughtered. And I was hidden in a water barrel. When they hauled it back, Dot's father was the one who opened it. Ethan listened without interrupting. He didn't give me away, she said quietly. He helped me hide. He told the others he'd found me during a hunt. I was so desperate, so afraid. Even though I hated the tribe leader, I knew running would mean dying alone in the desert. Her voice faltered for a moment. So I stayed. He was kind to me in his way. After a year I stopped fighting it. I accepted him. And in time I gave birth to Dot. Ryan let out a low sigh, shaking his head. So the Butcher tribe used to be bandits. Yes. Nora looked at him with a weary sadness. But I don't know why after you arrived, tribe leader Butcher never took the raiding party out again. Heh. Uncle Jed snorted softly. Maybe he thought he could play the good man at last. But I'd bet anything this migration was headed for Beastfall City. He hid my fragment and dragged me along because he already had a buyer in mind. Ethan frowned. Why do you think that? Uncle Jed's eyes flickered. Anyone who knows the legend understands. When all 5 map fragments are united, you can claim the greatest treasure in the Sea of Death. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. But there's a catch. To open the treasure's location, you need the bloodline power of the 5 families that guarded the fragments. Tribe leader Butcher must have known. His tribe was once powerful enough to learn secrets like that. Ding. System notification. Side quest triggered. Open the bloodline treasure gate. Ding. System notification. Main quest reward updated. Blood King's trial reward changed to bloodline treasure. Ethan nearly choked. This system is toying with me. So if Uncle Jed hadn't said a word, you'd have let me believe the reward was just a clue? And when I finally gathered all the fragments, you'd pop up to announce, oh, by the way, you also need the bloodlines. Good luck. His jaw tightened. What if I'd killed one of the families by mistake? Then the gate would be sealed forever. And now you're changing the reward like it's nothing. As if I need your permission to take the treasure once I open the gate myself. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to calm the frustration clawing at his chest. Ever since he arrived, the once reliable ethereal system had become more exasperating by the day. Either the rewards were insulting or the instructions deliberately vague. And as if that weren't enough, he hadn't heard a single word from Morzan. He'd called for him dozens of times, but there had been no answer. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Benefactor, are we going to Beastfall City? Nora's eyes searched his face, hopeful. He forced himself to breathe to set the irritation aside. Nora. Just call me Ethan, he said gently. Are you sure that heading west will take us there? In this endless desert, wandering without direction was as good as a death sentence. Chapter 356. The Desert's Cruel Embrace. Ethan's soul sense detected no immediate danger within a 5-kilometer radius, providing him with some peace of mind. However, the oppressive heat of the desert under the glare of 9 blazing suns made him reluctant to venture out. He preferred the cool of night when his soul sense ensured that no threats lurked in the darkness. But now he turned to Nora Vance, silently asking for guidance. Jed, standing beside him, mirrored the same expectant look. Nora Vance hesitated for a moment, caught in thought, before Dot stood up and addressed them. Big brother Uncle Jed, my mom isn't lying. Dot exclaimed, her small voice unwavering. If you head west from here in 7 days, you'll pass 4 safe points, she continued, but along the way there are areas frequented by sand scorpions, blazing lizards, and fiery earth rats. Dot's small hands moved as if to demonstrate the path. She seemed like a miniature adult, serious and detailed in her speech. If you want to be safer on the 3rd day, you need to head south for 2 days before turning northwest. Nora Vance stood by, silent but smiling at her daughter's focus. She gave a gentle nod but didn't interrupt. How do you know all this? Uncle Jed asked, genuinely astounded. Dot glanced up at Nora Vance, who returned her look with a quiet nod. Bring it out, Nora Vance said. Dot pulled a small belly band from her embrace, fumbling with it for a moment before pulling out a thin, palm-sized piece of white leathery material. The map, though small, seemed to pulse with significance. Here. Dot handed the item to Ethan, her fingers grasping the edge carefully. Ding. System notification. Incomplete. Sea of Death map detected. Copy. After copying, the map system will be activated. Ethan's heart quickened with excitement. Copy. He quickly sent the command. Ding. System notification. Copy complete. Map system activated. As soon as his hand touched the map, Ethan instinctively knew what it was. His attention shifted to the upper right corner of his vision where the minimap lit up. With growing interest, he unfolded the map on the table. It was a detailed record highlighting safe routes, dangerous regions, and the locations of 4 major cities. Yet, despite its detail, the system flagged it as incomplete. Jed leaned over to study the map. "Where are we now?" he asked. Nora Vance lightly tapped a spot on the map. It was only slightly off from their current position, but it was close enough. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Nora, how do you pinpoint our location?" he asked, curiosity piqued. Everyone knew that maps alone were useless without a way to determine one's position. The desert's ever-shifting terrain meant a map without positioning was little more than decoration. Wind and time could change the landscape in a moment, making it impossible to rely on sight alone. Nora Vance met his gaze and slowly explained seasons, wind direction, the sun, shadows, time. Dot, still perched on her mother's back, piped up. "Mama says this is the Vance family's wind listening and position-finding technique. I secretly learned it when I was little. Mama says Dot must always remember it. That's why I went hungry and got spanked a lot," she added with a sniffle as if the memory still stung. Nora Vance smiled warmly, lowering her head to ruffle Dot's hair. Ethan couldn't help but notice that since leaving the butcher tribe, Nora smiled much more often. "I've heard of the Vance family's wind listening and position-finding technique," Uncle Jed said, nodding with respect. "It's remarkable. I didn't expect Dot to have mastered it." Ethan nodded in agreement, then glanced back at the map, still in awe of its detail. Uncle Jed's eyes grew intense. "Ethan, let's go," he urged, his tone sharp. Ethan was absorbed in the scale of the Sea of Death displayed on the system map. The vast desert spanned a staggering 153392551 square kilometers, larger than Earth's total land area by more than 10 million square kilometers. The enormity of it made him pause. Just how vast was this world? Absorbed in his thoughts, Ethan was snapped back to the present when Uncle Jed called out to him. He nodded, still a bit lost in the enormity of what they faced. "All right, let's go. After we eat," he said, stalling for a bit longer. The thought of stepping into the heat was too much. As they ate their meal of instant noodles and giant scorpion meat, Jed joked, "Ethan, you're spoiling us." He chuckled. "After we part ways, we won't survive in the Sea of Death without you." Ethan paused, his heart heavy. Jed's words were light, but they struck him deeply. How could something as simple as instant noodles be so meaningful in such a desolate place? Uncle Jed stepped outside the tent, signaling their departure. Reluctantly, Ethan followed, knowing the time had come to face the heat. As they exited the sealed tent, a wall of scorching heat hit them. It was suffocating, and Ethan took a moment to adjust. He turned to find Jed and the others clutching their chests, struggling as well. Ethan mused. Seems like living in air-conditioned rooms too much isn't good for them. If they caught a cold in this desert heat, it would be bad. Uncle Jed led the way with Nora Vance and Dot following closely behind. As the first sun began to set, Nora Vance suddenly stopped. Dot, whom she had been carrying, began to vomit uncontrollably. Ethan rushed over in alarm. "Just as I feared, what you dread most happens," he thought, his stomach tightening. He called for Uncle Jed and quickly pulled out a tent from his spatial storage. They set it up quickly as Dot collapsed onto the ground, her face pale and her body trembling. The vomiting was accompanied by diarrhea and her temperature spiked dangerously high. Ethan immediately activated tree form, casting every healing spell he knew, even using his dispel skill. But nothing worked. On the surface, it seemed like heatstroke. Ethan cursed himself for letting Dot eat cold watermelon, for letting her stay in the air conditioning. She was just a child, and the temperature shift had been too much for her fragile body. He glanced at the supplies in his mindscape, but there was no medicine. Time passed slowly, each minute an agonizing reminder of their helplessness. The 3 adults were frantic. Night fell and Ethan tried again, offering fresh water to Nora Vance to wipe Dot's body, hoping to lower her temperature. Nora Vance's tears fell freely as she wiped her daughter's sweating skin. Dot, in a delirious state, kept calling for her father. Ethan's heart shattered at the sound. He stepped out of the tent, his gaze meeting Uncle Jed's grim face. "Ethan," Uncle Jed said softly, his voice low with worry, "Dot might not make it." Ethan froze, his mind racing. He had thought this was just heatstroke, something common on Earth that wouldn't be fatal. But Uncle Jed's tone suggested otherwise. "Heat, wind, sickness. In the Sea of Death, it claims countless lives," Uncle Jed said quietly. "If my son were alive, he'd be 10 years old this year." His words were like a hammer, striking Ethan with a painful realization. In ancient times, a simple cold or heatstroke could be a death sentence. There were no vaccines here, no modern medicine. Suddenly, a system notification flashed in front of Ethan's vision. Ding. System notification. Detecting activity from fatal microorganisms within the protagonist's body. Please eliminate them as soon as possible. Ethan's stomach clenched. The next moment, he doubled over in pain, a deep, indescribable discomfort racking his body. He ran, barely managing to find a spot before vomiting violently. Uncle Jed watched in stunned silence, his face filled with dread. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his stomach. He realized that his symptoms were exactly the same as Dot's. He remembered the warning from the system the night before at the Butcher Tribe camp. He staggered back toward the tent, feeling a surge of panic. "Uncle Jed," Ethan gasped, his voice hoarse. "Why were you wearing face coverings last night?" At the question, Uncle Jed's eyes widened in realization. Chapter 357. A familiar voice. Uncle Jed's face turned ashen as he took a step back, his voice strained. "Are you and Dot?" Ethan nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. What exactly are they?" "Sandworm eggs. Contagious?" Ethan asked, seeing the dread in Jed's eyes. Uncle Jed nodded again. "Stop with the MMMS. How do we get them out?" Ethan's voice rose with urgency. The system had already warned him about lethal microorganisms. His own death wasn't really the problem. At worst, the mission would fail and he'd be teleported out. But Dot was a living, breathing child. Ethan no longer felt the way he had when he first arrived. He understood now this was a real world. He still didn't grasp how ethereal could transport him to different places, but he couldn't just stand by while a little girl's life was at risk. Besides, Dot was so small and innocent, barely 5 years old, and she'd just lost her father. Uncle Jed shook his head, pale as chalk. Ethan froze at his response. Was this another dead end? "Sandworm eggs will gradually grow inside the body," Uncle Jed explained. "They devour flesh for nourishment and finally hatch." A wave of revulsion rolled over Ethan. The thought of countless worms wriggling through his veins made his skin crawl. "I refuse to believe it." He sat down abruptly in the sand. Pulling an advanced antidote from his inventory, he tossed it into his mouth and bit down. The outer shell tasted almost like candy, sweet, oddly pleasant. But he had no time to savor it. He swallowed hard. The system remained silent. Ethan's face went pale. The antidote was useless. What was he supposed to do? Drink insecticide? Even if he had some, he wouldn't dare. The poison would kill him faster than the worms. If they were still eggs, maybe he could remove them directly. Closing his eyes, he drew his soul sense back into his body and began to scan himself from within. He searched his lungs first. Nothing. His soul sense swept through every inch of his flesh, cold and meticulous like an invisible X-ray. Finally, when he poured more soul power into the search, he found them. Tiny yellow specks clinging to the walls of his blood vessels. If they hadn't shifted slightly, he might have missed them entirely. They moved sluggishly, unfazed by the flow of blood. Relief mixed with disgust as he exhaled. At least he'd found them. He gathered his soul power and willed it to condense within the vessels, trying to crush the eggs in place. But the instant his soul power clamped down, the worms erupted in a frenzy. Countless suckers latched onto the vessel walls, refusing to let go. If he tried to yank them free, his blood vessels would tear apart. He held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. He couldn't retract his soul sense. If he did, they'd scatter. But he also couldn't apply more pressure. If he burst them, their toxins would flood his bloodstream. "Let me." A faint ethereal voice echoed in his mind. "Who?" Ethan jolted. This wasn't Morzen's voice. It was a girl's, soft and almost shy. "Me? You? Who are you?" Ethan's patience frayed. "Just saying me doesn't help. I'm just me." The voice sounded almost offended now. He forced himself to calm down. There was something familiar in her tone. Where had he heard it before? Suddenly his eyes lit up. While keeping part of his focus locked on the worms, he opened his inventory. His gaze fell on the dragon egg Morzen had given him. He had 4 dragon eggs now, 3 he'd stolen. With a thought, he pulled one out. "Is that you?" he asked the blue-shelled egg. "It's me. I can help you with what's inside you, but..." The voice trailed off hesitantly. "But what?" Ethan pressed. "I don't want to stay in that dark inventory anymore. I want to live in your mindscape." "Fine. No problem." He didn't even hesitate. His mindscape was crowded already, but one more egg wouldn't make a difference. And what? Can you just say it all at once? I sense something I need. In that direction. You must take me there and help me get it." Ethan's heart sank, but when he checked the map, he realized she meant the direction they were already heading. Due west toward Beastfall City. "All right. No problem," he agreed quickly. He guided the dragon egg into his mindscape. Ding. System notification. Accepted. Pet egg. Blue dragon. S request. Reward. Top-tier pet incubation stone X1. Finally, something useful. A top-tier incubation stone guaranteed a 100% hatch rate and increased the pet's growth potential. But relief was short-lived. Even if he was cured, Dot and maybe Nora Vance and Uncle Jed were still infected. What about them? Before he could ask, the egg settled into his mindscape, nesting on the crown of the mindscape's tree. It wiggled twice, then began to glow with a pale blue light that slowly sank into his consciousness. Ding. System notification. Mental power upgraded, imbued with dragon's might. Acquired skill. Blue dragon's intimidation. Uncle Jed had been watching Ethan closely from a distance. He saw Ethan open his eyes, then pull out a blue egg the size of a football. Just as Jed was about to ask what he was doing, the egg flashed, shrank rapidly, and vanished into Ethan's brow. A blue glow began to ripple across Ethan's body. Within minutes, Ethan's eyes snapped open again. He pulled a knife from his belt, pricked his fingertip, and let the dark, murky blood spill out onto the sand. 2 minutes later, the blood changed from black to bright red. Ding! System notification. Detected that all lethal microorganisms in the main character's body have disappeared. Ethan exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. It's gone? Uncle Jed's eyes widened. He looked as if he couldn't decide whether to cheer or faint. Yes. Ethan nodded. He still felt a little dizzy, but that was just blood loss, easy to fix. A couple of healing spells later, warmth returned to his limbs. He remembered the moment the system upgraded his mental power. His soul power had transformed. The worms trapped in his soul sense curled into tiny trembling balls and released their hold on his vessels. Without hesitation, he had wrapped them up and guided them to his fingertip, then simply bled them out. After casting a rejuvenation spell on himself, he didn't spare Uncle Jed another glance. He rushed into the tent. Nora Vance gasped as he grabbed her hand. With the other, he gently took Dot's small, feverish palm. Ethan, what? Nora tried to pull back, but when she saw the blue light spilling from his fingers and sinking into her skin, she stopped resisting. A moment later, he let go, as he feared she was infected too. But her worms were still dormant eggs. Nora, please step outside. I'll treat you there. Treat me? She blinked at him, bewildered. Yes. Dot doesn't have a fever. She has sandworm eggs inside her. Nora Vance went rigid. Tears pooled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. If it were just a fever, there'd be a chance. But this was certain death. Seeing her expression, Ethan quickly explained that he'd been infected himself, and that he'd already removed the eggs. He promised he could save Dot. Nora searched his face, her breath hitching. Then she looked down and nodded. She said nothing more. When she finally met his gaze again, he saw it. Trust. Without another word, she turned and stepped outside. Ethan handed her an N95 mask. She took it, studying it for only a second before slipping it over her face and pinching the bridge for a snug seal. Ethan couldn't help but smile faintly. She was so much quicker than Uncle Jed. When Jed first got the mask, he turned it over in his hands for ages, baffled, until Ethan had finally stepped in to help him. Nora had figured it out in a heartbeat. At the tent entrance, Uncle Jed hesitated. A flicker of guilt passed over his face. He stepped aside to let Nora through, then zipped the tent closed behind her. Chapter 358. Nightshade and Trust. Not long after Nora Vance, who had been waiting anxiously, saw the tent zipper open, Ethan emerged carrying a basin. The basin was pitch black, filled with the blood that had flowed from Dot's fingertip. Once outside, Ethan took out a bottle, poured its contents into the basin, and ignited it. A foul stench immediately wafted through the air. He had poured in gasoline. Next, Ethan gestured for Nora to enter the tent while Uncle Jed remained outside. Removing the worm eggs from Nora was, to say the least, awkward. His entire soul sense had to circulate within her body. It was unavoidable that his senses would brush against intimate areas. Nora felt the strange current of his soul power moving through her, and her face flushed crimson. She bit her lip, trying to endure the sensation. Just as Ethan managed to steady himself and focus, Nora let out a soft, involuntary moan. At that exact moment, his soul sense happened to be passing through a particularly sensitive part of her body. The sound nearly caused him to lose his concentration altogether. Ethan looked up at her. Nora, mortified, immediately shut her eyes. That expression was even harder for him to bear. Her tightly closed eyes, that look of helplessness, made his soul power within her expand. Contract. Expand. Contract. Until Nora trembled under the strain. Who? Ethan exhaled, slowly pressing his tongue against the roof of his mouth. He closed his eyes and steadied his mind. Bit by bit, he managed to regain control of his soul sense. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes and picked up his small knife again. Nora, just a moment. She opened her eyes and nodded, trying to compose herself. He made a quick incision, and a stream of black blood spurted from her now purplish-black fingertip. He burned it the same way as before, then cast a rejuvenation spell to replenish her strength and help her produce more healthy blood. Finally, he stumbled out of the tent, barely able to stay upright. Uncle Jed, who had been waiting anxiously, reached out to steady him. Then he extended his hand toward Ethan. What do you want? Ethan asked, his voice raw with exhaustion. Get rid of mine too, Uncle Jed said, startled by Ethan's tone. Get rid of what? You're not infected. Ethan swatted his hand away, too tired to argue. His nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Removing the worms from Nora had drained him more than treating himself and Dot combined. He had to empty his mind completely while holding his concentration steady, all while Nora kept making those nearly inaudible yet unbelievably suggestive sounds. Uncle Jed followed after him, still pressing, "Are you sure?" Ethan didn't answer. He just turned his back and walked a few paces away before dropping to the sand and lying flat. He felt as if every last bit of strength had seeped out of him. For a moment he let his thoughts drift. Nora, with her bronzed skin and taut athletic physique, probably from years of desert life, had somehow made it all much harder. Even now he couldn't quite erase the memory of the tension in her body, the way her abdomen was sculpted with muscle yet retained its softness. After resting a couple of minutes, Ethan forced himself to sit up. He took out a new tent and set it up nearby. Then he returned to the old tent, radiating soul power imbued with dragon's might. The system hadn't indicated any lethal microorganisms inside, but the air reeked of blood and decay. He didn't want that lying in that any longer. As he unzipped the flap, Nora, who had been crouching with her back to the entrance, suddenly stood. But Ethan still caught a glimpse of her hastily wiping something away. "Nora, the new tent is ready. You can head over. I'll carry Dot." He'd barely recovered, and seeing that scene almost made him falter. Nora nodded quickly. Clutching something tightly in her hand, she brushed past Ethan without meeting his eyes. She ran straight into Uncle Jed, who had been peeking inside. The collision nearly knocked the old man off his feet. She'd been moving so fast that even though Uncle Jed's body slowed her a little, she still darted away into the new tent. Ethan let out a long breath and turned back to Dot. Her complexion had improved and her fever had receded. He carefully lifted her and carried her into the fresh tent. Then he took out the gasoline again, dousing the interior and the exterior of the old tent. He glanced around. There was only a bed and a few stools inside. The only thing he regretted losing was the air conditioner, but there was no help for it. He wasn't about to risk taking contaminated objects into his soul vault. If some hidden parasite survived and ended up on Earth later, it could turn into an invasive nightmare. He pulled out a pack of nightshade cigarettes, tore the wrapper open, and lit one. He took a slow drag. It had been a long time since he'd smoked, and the first puff sent a wave of euphoria washing over him. With a flick of his fingers, he tossed the glowing butt into the gasoline-soaked tent. Boom! A tower of fire roared up into the night. Ethan watched the blaze and thought even the most formidable worms have to fear fire. While he stood there, Uncle Jed came up beside him. Without a word, the old man reached for the pack of nightshade in Ethan's hand. He opened it, took a deep sniff, and his eyes lit up. Nightshade! Ethan was startled. He hadn't realized this world had tobacco. Though he'd never been much of a student, he knew tobacco belonged to the nightshade family, so technically the old man wasn't wrong. You had this? Why didn't you bring it out last night?" Uncle Jed's voice rose with disbelief. "Last night?" Ethan frowned. "Yes, sandworms hate the smell of nightshade. They'll avoid it. If you'd taken this out, half the butcher tribe wouldn't have died." Uncle Jed's hands suddenly clamped around Ethan's collar. His face was stricken. "Damn it!" Ethan shoved him back, voice hoarse with fatigue and anger. "How the hell was I supposed to know? Besides, I only had this much. What good would it have done?" He pulled out dozens more packs of nightshade and threw them at the old man's feet. "And even if it had worked, what does any of that have to do with me? They wanted me dead. Why would I save them? If those worms hadn't shown up when they did, I might have killed the entire butcher tribe myself." Forget it." Uncle Jed's shoulders slumped. He slowly sank into a squat and said nothing more. The two men stood there on the sand dune. One standing, one squatting, with piles of nightshade scattered between them. A heavy silence settled over them both. Ethan turned his back, still fuming. Snap. A soft sound broke the quiet behind him. Hiss, cough, cough. "This is strong." Ethan froze. Whoosh. A gust of wind whipped past him. Without even looking, he instinctively reached out and caught the object flying toward his head. He turned around to see Uncle Jed with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, holding out a hand in invitation. Smoke curled around the old man's face, his eyes watering as he tried to smile. "Never smoked before? Trying to act tough?" Ethan muttered, curling his lip. "Damn it, who said I haven't smoked before? At least," he trailed off, then mumbled, "Nightshade. It's rare here, but it's still found." Ethan caught the odd tone in his voice. The old man was still hiding something. But Ethan didn't care. He had his own plans. He'd been eyeing Uncle Jed's spearmanship for a while now, waiting for a chance to learn from him. Seeing the old man make the first move to break the tension suited him just fine. "Tastes good, doesn't it?" Ethan said. With a thought, he made the packs of nightshade on the ground vanish into his mindscape. He strolled over and reached for the open pack in Uncle Jed's hand. Uncle Jed's fingers twitched. He dodged Ethan's grab and tucked the pack neatly into his pocket. At the same time, he palmed the lighter and slipped it into the other pocket with practiced ease. "Damn it," Ethan cursed. No wonder the lighter he'd used at noon had disappeared. This old man had swiped it. "Want to smoke?" Ethan asked. Uncle Jed took a long drag, exhaled, and nodded. "Tastes good. Haven't had one in a long time." Of course it tastes good, Ethan thought. It's nightshade. Even if you've smoked something similar before, it wouldn't have this flavor. I can give you all of it if you want, Ethan said casually. Oh? Uncle Jed's gaze sharpened. He knew exactly how valuable nightshade was out here. In the sea of death there was even an old saying, nightshade nature's cure-all. It kept the chill of frost and rain from settling in your bones, chased off swamp fever and bad air, and was said to ward away spirits and other things best left unnamed. Children who chewed it were spared the wasting sickness. Women claimed it eased the worst pains and swellings. Whether it was sluggish blood-sour gut or a chest full of phlegm, a breath of its smoke was enough to clear it out. Most importantly, its scent drives away sandworms. A tribe with just a few nightshade trees could survive the nights without fear of an attack. Now this kid Ethan was saying he'd give it all away. Uncle Jed studied him carefully. What exactly was he up to? Chapter 359. The Path of the Spear. Ethan watched Uncle Jed fall silent. His eyes darted for a moment before he waved his hand dismissively. You don't want to? Why wouldn't I? Of course I do. Hearing Uncle Jed's words, Ethan turned around. Before he could speak, Uncle Jed continued in a flat tone, all right then. Tell me, what exactly do you want me to do? Ethan rubbed his nose, feeling awkward. Had he been that obvious? Had Uncle Jed seen right through him? It's nothing much. Your spearmanship, I think it's pretty good. Maybe you could teach me a few moves? Since he'd already been exposed, Ethan decided not to pretend anymore. What? Uncle Jed stared at him like he'd misheard. You're serious? You really want to learn my spearmanship? Uncle Jed could hardly believe it. What? You're reluctant? Ethan frowned. Was this spearmanship some kind of priceless thing? Meanwhile, Uncle Jed was thinking the opposite. Was Ethan joking? The two men stood there in an awkward stare-off, each imagining something different. If you don't want to, forget it. I won't force you. Ethan turned to leave. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed an opened pack of nightshade over his shoulder. It landed neatly in Uncle Jed's hand. Ask me for more when you run out, Ethan added. He walked over to the tent and slumped against it, sitting on the cold sand. The temperature had already dropped below freezing, but it didn't bother him. More than anything, he was too embarrassed to crawl back inside. The memory of that awkward moment with Nora still clung to him. Uncle Jed stood on the slope, still trying to puzzle out Ethan's intentions. Didn't the kid realize that energy users were the most common thing in this world? Sure, he was skilled in hand-to-hand combat and his spear techniques were solid. But in Forgotten City, he was just a drill instructor teaching basic combat to people who couldn't channel the world's energy. Ethan, on the other hand, had the power to summon meteor showers that could wipe out armies. And now he wanted to learn spearmanship from him? Uncle Jed was baffled. He took a drag of the nightshade, savoring the flavor. This batch tasted much better than the ones he'd swiped from the tribe leader. He tucked the rest into his pocket with a satisfied grunt. Then he walked over and lay down beside Ethan in the sand. Through the night, Ethan closed his eyes but didn't sleep. He spread out his soul sense, keeping watch in every direction. Only when dawn crept over the dunes did he finally drift off. He knew the rising sun meant the sandworms would stay hidden. A sudden splash of sand hit his face. Ethan jerked awake, ready to curse. But when he opened his eyes, Uncle Jed was standing over him. Behind him, two nascent suns were climbing the horizon. For an instant, Ethan thought he saw an aura like a spear anchored to the earth. The sight made him forget whatever insult he'd been about to shout. Uncle Jed called out, his voice carrying over the sand. The path of the spear can be both rigid and fluid. The moment he started speaking, Ethan scrambled to his feet, listening with all his focus. To walk the spear's path, the first step is to temper your body. Draw in the world's energy. Shed the dust of the mundane. Establish the stellar cycles. Gather the 3 spirits and 5 senses. Endure 9 rebirths of the heart. Wield yin and yang over heaven and earth. Defy the grand forces of nature. Break the shackles of the sky. Uncle Jed paused. By now the third sun had risen. He glanced at Ethan and asked, "Do you understand?" Ethan stared blankly, utterly lost. He shook his head. He was about to ask if Uncle Jed could repeat it, but Uncle Jed declared with a righteous tone, "It's good that you don't understand. Forget everything I just said. Let's practice." Ethan nodded quickly. In stories, the master would always lecture like this, and when the disciple confessed they hadn't understood a word, the master would call them a prodigy. Maybe he was a natural talent too. "Ethan, bring out that metal sheet from yesterday," Uncle Jed ordered. Ethan hurried over, pulling out the steel plate that had been burned blue by the fire. "Move the tent here, and set up that cold air blower you were fiddling with." Ethan followed every instruction, setting the solar panel air conditioner on top of the steel plate. By the time he was done, Uncle Jed had already wrapped it with thick climbing ropes. He tossed one end of the rope in front of Ethan. "Let's go." "Huh?" Ethan blinked. "Huh, what?" "Pull it. Let's move." Uncle Jed snapped, his face stern. Ethan glanced from the rope to Uncle Jed, who had climbed onto the steel plate with his hands clasped behind his back. You want me to pull you around? What are you thinking? Your body's strong, full of muscle and power, but your force is scattered. Remember how I redirected your punch without effort. If you want to master the spear, you have to unify your strength. Every muscle and every bone must work together. Only then can you wield the spear as an extension of your will. Only then can each strike carry enough force to bring giants to their knees and split stone from the earth. Boom. Ethan didn't hear anything else. That last sentence, bring giants to their knees and split stone from the earth, echoed over and over in his head. By the time he came back to himself, Uncle Jed was gone. Ethan bent down, picked up the rope, and slung it over his shoulder. He pulled until the line was taut, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Slide. His foot sank into the soft sand. As soon as he put weight on it, it slipped backward. He pitched forward face first and ate a mouthful of grit. Inside the tent, Uncle Jed watched through the flap, his mouth twitching. He made no move to help. He just kept watching. Minutes passed. The 9 suns were high in the sky and the steel plate hadn't budged an inch. Uncle Jed, Ethan is already so strong. Do you really need to train him like this? Nora Vance stood nearby, unable to watch any longer. She had seen Uncle Jed train before. When he first arrived at the butcher tribe, half dead from his wounds, he'd recovered by dragging a giant animal skeleton around the camp every day. Later, when he trained the warriors, this exercise had become mandatory. Now he was putting Ethan through the same ordeal. It was brutal. She remembered her own man coming back exhausted, barely able to crawl into bed. He's strong? Uncle Jed said, his voice softening. Yes, he's strong. He looked out at Ethan, still straining at the rope. But if Elijah were still alive, we'd have moved at least 100 meters by now. Nora's expression darkened. She lowered her head. Uncle Jed realized he'd said too much. He didn't know how to take it back, so he just shut his mouth. Mommy. Dot's small voice broke the silence. Nora spun around. Dot had opened her eyes and was looking up at her. Dot. Tears welled up in Nora's eyes. Ethan had said the girl would be fine, but she'd been unconscious for so long. Mommy, don't cry. I'm okay. I just want water. Her voice grew fainter. Water was precious. Every drop was rationed and measured. All right. There's water. Nora wiped her eyes and picked up the bucket Ethan had left in the tent. She grabbed the metal cup he'd set aside. Carefully she poured a little, then paused. She glanced at Dot's pale face, hesitated, and poured a few more drops. It didn't look like enough, but she was afraid to waste any. Uncle Jed finally couldn't stand it. He snatched the bucket from her hands. Ethan said she lost a lot of blood. She needs to drink more so her body can recover, he barked. Thump, thump, thump. He filled the cup nearly to the brim. Don't let her suffer. Even if she gets used to it, what does it matter? Aren't you planning to take her back to Clear Spring City? She still has a grandfather there. Your Vance family has never lacked for water. Nora tried to smile, but it came out bitter. I'm just afraid. He won't acknowledge me as his daughter. And he'll never accept her as his granddaughter. Her voice trembled. She had stormed out 8 years ago after a terrible fight. When she came back, she already had a child. She could imagine the look on her father's face. Disgust, disappointment. Maybe it was better never to return. Heck, Uncle Jed gave a dry laugh. If that old man Nathaniel is dead, then so be it. But if he's still alive, and he dares to cast you out, I'll go to Clear Spring myself and knock some sense into him. Nora looked at Uncle Jed. Her heart felt tight and warm all at once. Nathaniel was indeed her father. Chapter 360. The Scorpion's Gift. Nora Vance looked at Uncle Jed, her voice filled with surprise. Uncle Jed, you knew my father? Uncle Jed waved a dismissive hand. Go on, get Dot some water. Seeing his reluctance to speak further, Nora carefully picked up the cup. But as she turned, her foot slipped. She stumbled and half the water sloshed out onto the steel floor. That brat. Uncle Jed was already looking out the window. Ethan was out there, inching forward one tiny step at a time. The steel plate beneath his feet crawled across the sand at a glacial pace. Nora quickly carried the remaining water over and helped Dot drink. Dot swallowed greedily, as if she hadn't had a drop in days. When Nora turned to look out the window again, Ethan had stripped off his upper garment and draped it over his neck. His pale, almost luminous skin caught the last rays of sunlight. It was a shade of white Nora couldn't help but envy. He'd been here for days, always wrapped in some protective clothing. His head hidden under the hood of his suit, his face obscured by a black veil. She realized she had never actually seen his face. Now, even just seeing his back, slender but lined with defined muscles, she felt a flicker of curiosity. He was lean, but the shape of his shoulders and arms looked strong enough to rival Uncle Jed's build. Though Ethan's bare back wasn't enough to stir any romantic thoughts in a woman still mourning her husband, she still wondered what his face looked like beneath that veil. And then she remembered last night when he had removed the parasites from her body. Her face flushed involuntarily. Mommy, why is your face so red? Are you sick too? Small voice cut through the silence. Nora's eyes widened. Uncle Jed glanced at Nora's burning cheeks, then looked outside at Ethan. He chuckled under his breath. Uncle Jed. Nora wished the ground would swallow her whole. Unfortunately, she was standing on a steel plate several inches thick. Uncle Jed stifled his laughter, returning his gaze outside with a faint smile. Ethan was learning faster than he'd expected. He already had some sense of the unified force Jed had tried to teach him. Hurry up. Are you a damn turtle? Uncle Jed bellowed through the open window. Ethan in the distance stiffened. Damn it. When Uncle Jed decided to train someone, he turned into a completely different person. Before he'd seemed easygoing. Now he was a drill sergeant. But just now Ethan had felt that elusive sensation of power flowing in perfect coordination. The strength he unleashed in that moment was almost equal to a normal bear form attack, and he hadn't even transformed. He was still in human form. For a man who had been called worthless in 2 lifetimes, grasping that understanding felt like a revelation. How could he not be excited? And at the same time, he couldn't help acknowledging Uncle Jed's skill. Back when they practiced on flat ground, they could at least use friction to drag heavy loads. But now the ground beneath the steel plate was nothing but soft sand. Trying to pull 2 tons of metal, plus 10 solar panels, the air conditioning unit, without leverage or friction seemed impossible. Yet Ethan remembered waking up yesterday sprawled across this same steel plate. Uncle Jed had dragged it along as if it weighed nothing. If he can do it, why can't I? From morning until now, nearly 8 hours later, he hadn't moved more than a few yards. But he refused to stop. He hadn't eaten a bite or drunk a drop of water. He kept searching for that feeling Uncle Jed described, every muscle aligned in a single unified force. When Jed started yelling at him to hurry up, frustration welled up in Ethan's chest. It wasn't that he didn't want to move faster, he simply couldn't. If he forced it, his strength scattered and the plate wouldn't budge. So every step came from his entire being. And every inch forward felt like a victory. Finally, as the first sun set, Uncle Jed called out. Enough! Thud. Ethan collapsed face first into the sand, too exhausted to lift his head. He lay there like a dead dog, not caring if he ever stood again. Uncle Jed walked over and gave him a firm kick in the ribs. Follow me. Groaning, Ethan forced himself upright and trailed after Jed. Jed demonstrated 3 slow, fluid movements. They reminded Ethan vaguely of yoga, though somehow even more uncomfortable. There were only 3 poses, but they took until the remaining 8 suns set to complete. Strangely, as he moved, his muscles began to tingle and itch. When they finally finished, the soreness hadn't disappeared completely, but it was better. Nora approached with 2 bowls of instant noodles she'd prepared. Ethan's heart sank when he realized she was only holding 2. Wait, what about mine? These were his supplies. What are you staring at? Uncle Jed snapped. Get the scorpion out. Dot's waiting to eat. You're not seriously going to let her live on junk food, are you? Ethan blinked, his mind slow to process it. Uncle Jed could actually tell instant noodles were junk food? Sighing, he didn't even bother arguing. His throat felt like it had been scorched dry by the 9 suns. He uncapped a bottle of water and chugged it down. Then, with a thought, he summoned a massive scorpion. A military machete appeared in his hand. He wondered whether the blade would even cut through the thing's armor. Uncle Jed took the machete and propped the scorpion's claw up. With a couple of precise prying motions, the basin-sized claw snapped off. Grill it with the shell on, he instructed. If you peel it first, the meat will burn as soon as it hits the fire. Ethan accepted the claw, but Jed wasn't finished. He hopped onto the scorpion's back and pulled out his worn leather water pouch. At the base of the tail stinger, he carefully worked the machete's tip under a narrow seam. After a moment, a few clear drops of liquid trickled out, releasing a faint sweet fragrance. Ethan's eyes widened. Holy hell! You made me drink that stuff? Jed glanced down, smirking. You didn't know? This is a treasure. A scorpion this size only has 5 or 6 drops. He tapped the segment just above the stinger with the blade. The real poison's here. You last time drank 3 mouthfuls. Do you have any idea how long it took me to collect that? This stuff saves lives, boy. Don't waste it. Ethan swallowed. He didn't need Jed to explain. He already knew it was potent. Back when they fought the sandworms, Jed had survived hours of brutal fighting on this alone. He set up the grill, planning to prepare the scorpion claws like grilled oysters. Vermicelli, minced garlic, a few seasonings. He placed the claws on the great boiled water to soak the noodles and began chopping garlic. While the meat cooked, he checked the time and frowned. He wasn't sure how long it needed. Nora, he called, can you tell if it's ready? She came over to inspect. Needs a little longer, she said. Then she stood beside him, watching his hands work. What's this seasoning for? And this one? Ethan explained each step, and Nora jotted everything down. Finally, she looked up. You should rest for a bit. I'll finish grilling. He hesitated only a second before nodding. Even unseasoned scorpion meat tasted fine. He doubted she could ruin it too badly. Stretching out on the steel plate, he let himself relax. Above him, the stars burned bright against the darkness. His eyelids drifted shut. He dreamed of Lila. She was in his arms, her skin smooth under his fingers. He drew her hand to his chest, guiding her touch, feeling her warmth. He pulled her hand lower. She resisted slightly, but not enough to stop him. Ethan, Ethan, wake up. Hey. Her voice sounded off. Usually in dreams like this, Lila called him Effie, and if he tried to push further, she'd smack him. But this time, even though she struggled, she didn't hit him. And why did Lila smell like minced garlic? Nora was kneeling beside him, biting her lip. A flush of anger and something more complicated colored her face. In her left hand, she still held the giant scorpion claw. The aroma of garlic wafted off it. And her right hand. Chapter 361. The Scorpion's Gift, 2. Ethan opened his eyes and looked down. Nora's right hand, which he'd been holding, had drifted below his abdomen. Her slender fingertips were already inside his waistband. In that indignant region, she felt a sudden chill. Nora's gaze followed Ethan's downward glance. When he looked up again, she quickly shifted her eyes away, tears brimming in her lashes. Ethan flinched and released her hand as if burned. He sat up, abruptly bending at the waist, trying to cover his agitated companion. Nora, I'm so sorry. His voice cracked. Mortification flooded through him. This was a widow who had just lost her husband, and just now in his sleep, he had almost forced her. Nora didn't say a word. She simply picked up the grilled scorpion claw and held it out to him. Then she turned and fled without looking back. Ethan stared after her retreating figure, then looked down at the food in his hand. A wry smile tugged at his lips. He pulled out a spoon and shoveled a big mouthful of scorpion claw into his mouth. Mixed with vermicelli and minced garlic, it melted across his tongue. He hadn't expected Nora, doing this for the first time, to master the cooking technique so well. The rich aroma blended with the spicy kick of Thai chili. It was simply heavenly. He still had over 200 large scorpions stored in his mindscape. When he returned, he'd have to let others taste this. What Australian lobster, what king crab, none of them could compare to even a fraction of this Deathstalker scorpion. He sat there devouring the meal until most of the claw was gone. Patting his slightly distended belly, he stood up and spotted Uncle Jed patrolling a sand dune nearby. Ethan walked over. Uncle Jed, how long was I asleep? About half an hour, Uncle Jed replied, his brow furrowed. Ethan, something's not right. At once Ethan spread out his soul sense. Within a 5-kilometer radius, including dozens of meters underground, there was no unusual movement at all. Nothing seems wrong. It's pretty quiet, Ethan said, puzzled. That's precisely the problem, Uncle Jed muttered. It's too quiet. Yesterday you had those sandworm eggs in you, so the worms didn't chase us. But today, they still haven't come. That doesn't add up. Ethan let out a nervous laugh. Haha. Maybe that attack yesterday wiped out the whole sandworm tribe. Uncle Jed just shook his head, unconvinced. Ethan probed even deeper, extending his soul sense over 50 meters down, but still found nothing. When it was clear there was no point arguing, he left Uncle Jed alone and stretched out a sleeping mat outside the tent. This time, though, he kept his soul sense spread while he rested. It burned through his soul power, but Uncle Jed's unease had rubbed off on him. Nothing disturbed the camp overnight. As soon as the first sun rose, Uncle Jed woke him, already back in drill sergeant mode. And so began Ethan's cart-pulling ordeal again. Yesterday he'd managed less than 100 meters. After a quick breakfast, which he ate without daring to meet Nora's eyes, he prepared himself. Nora, standing nearby, hesitated before asking Ethan, "Do you have any soft fur or fabric?" He frowned, unsure what she wanted. He shook his head, then thought better of it and rummaged through his mindscape. After a moment, he pulled out some expanded cotton used for padding packaging boxes. "Will this work?" Nora took it, squeezed it between her fingers, then nodded. "Can you bring out more?" Once he did. She walked to the rope he'd used to pull the steel plate yesterday and started wrapping the cotton around it layer by layer. Ethan watched, stunned. When he glanced down at his shoulder and saw the red rope burned marks, understanding dawned, and with it the memory of last night's dream. In it, Lila had stroked his shoulder with concern, asking if it hurt. Then he'd pulled her hand downward. He looked at Nora's focused back. Could it be? He shook his head, unable to figure it out. Today's goal, 100 meters, he announced to himself, taking the rope she'd handed him. He tried to lighten the moment by winking at her. She responded with a massive eye roll. Uncle Jed emerged from behind the tent carrying a second rope. "If you don't cover 1,000 meters today, no dinner." He bent to tie the rope to the steel plate. Ethan's stomach dropped. He realized too late what Uncle Jed had been planning. Earlier, when he'd tried to stash the scorpion carcass away, Uncle Jed had refused. Instead, he'd asked Ethan for another climbing rope. And now he tied the scorpion to the steel plate, adding even more weight. Ethan stared in disbelief. 1,000 meters? Was this a joke? He didn't argue. He just lifted the climbing rope, now padded so thick it was as wide as his arm, and draped it across his shoulders. Surprisingly, it didn't bite into his skin anymore. He let out a long breath. His muscles bunched and rippled. He took a careful step forward. The rope didn't slip. Unlike yesterday, he didn't just lunge ahead. Instead, he took a step, stopped, and reflected on every movement. By midday, he'd already covered twice yesterday's distance. When the 9 suns hung overhead, Uncle Jed allowed him only a small cup of water, no food. Ethan cursed under his breath but kept it to himself. As the afternoon wore on, he picked up his pace. His soul sense delved into his own body, monitoring how every muscle worked together. Inside the tent, Uncle Jed sat with wide eyes as he felt the steel plate shifting under his feet. He watched Ethan straining in the heat, and a memory surfaced. His own childhood, when his father had trained him this very way. From the time he was 3, he'd struggled to move the plate at all. Even at 5, he'd barely budged it. Yet Ethan, in just one day, had inched it forward. And today, with added weight, he was actually gaining momentum. Back then, when Uncle Jed had finally succeeded, his father had called him their family's greatest prodigy in generations. Compared to Ethan, though, hadn't he been just a fool? Of course, he didn't realize Ethan had a cheat. His powerful soul power let him observe and adjust every movement in real time. That was how Ethan mastered the technique so quickly. Uncle Jed's method of exerting force turned everything Ethan had learned on Earth upside down. On Earth, they taught that power began at the ground. The proper sequence was foot driving calf, calf driving knee, knee driving thigh, and finally the waist acting as the axis to unleash the strike. Ethan had drilled that system through 2 lifetimes. But Uncle Jed insisted that true power came entirely from within. Borrowing force was nonsense to him. He spoke of body synchronization. If you mastered it, you could exert force even when airborne. It reminded Ethan of cats. No matter how high they fell from, they always landed neatly on all 4s. Among energy users, attacking midair was considered a death sentence. TV shows made it look glamorous, flying around throwing attacks from the sky, but in real combat it was a guarantee you'd get yourself killed. In the air, you couldn't adjust or change direction. One mistake and you were finished. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Immersed in his own body, Ethan suddenly felt something shift. A mysterious light flickered across every muscle. His muscles and fascia glimmered with a thin sheen of silver. Tiny motes of starlight seemed to settle into them. Inside the tent, Uncle Jed shot to his feet. "Uncle Jed, what's wrong?" Nora asked, startled by his sudden movement. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Ethan, who stood outside in the dark, oblivious to everything but the sensations inside his body. Just now he'd seen Ethan's form swell, if only for an instant. A faint silver glow had washed over him, then vanished. Uncle Jed's heart thudded wildly. "How is that possible?" he whispered. He actually achieved star infusion. Chapter 362. The Desert's Secret. What Uncle Jed called star infusion was precisely the change Ethan felt within himself. Tiny white specks of light had appeared across all his fascia and muscles. When he moved, each speck seemed like a separate control point. It was as if his entire muscular system had been reformatted, or rather all his strength had been linked together in a single network. One motion affected the whole. If any single speck exerted force, all the others would flash in response, transmitting power. The flashes moved in quick succession, rippling through him like a wave of starlight. This novel sensation amused Ethan. All at once, he widened his stride and sped up. The 3 people inside the tent were thrown backward by the sudden jolt, nearly toppling over. At that moment, Ethan was like a rampaging bull pulling the rope as he began to run faster and faster. The tent tied to the steel plate behind him bounced and lurched as though it were riding a roller coaster. Holy cow! That little rascal! Uncle Jed, swaying precariously, finally managed to unzip the tent flap. He leapt out and bounded forward until he reached Ethan's side. To his surprise, Ethan was running with his eyes closed. A thought struck him. Was he asleep? But Ethan wasn't sleeping. He was immersed in his soul sense, utterly absorbed, watching the silver specks flicker inside him like starlight dancing across a dark sky. He felt as if he could watch them forever. Then came a sharp pain in his neck. The starlight vanished, replaced by darkness. His last thought was, "Damn it! Who hit me?" After an unknown stretch of time, Ethan slowly opened his eyes. Overhead, countless stars glimmered across the vast sky. For a moment, he lay there dazed. The throbbing in his neck quickly brought him back to reality. "Uncle Jed. You old geezer," he growled, springing to his feet. Not far away, the tent stood quietly. Uncle Jed, Nora, and Dot were sitting together talking. From time to time, Dot's silvery laughter drifted over to him. When they heard his shout, all 3 looked up. "Uncle Ethan, come quickly, come quickly." Dot waved, her smile bright in the starlight. Seeing her, Ethan couldn't stay angry, though he felt mildly annoyed. When Dot had first met him, she'd called him Big Brother. Somehow his seniority had now been promoted to Uncle. He shot Uncle Jed a glare, eyes sharp, then turned to Nora. The moment their eyes met, she quickly looked away. "What are you staring at?" "Get some food out," Uncle Jed barked in his usual commanding tone. "Isn't there some in the back?" Ethan asked, referring to the scorpion they'd caught earlier. "It's been out in the sun all day. It's nearly spoiled. Let's have something different," Uncle Jed said. Ethan rolled his eyes, ready to retort, but when he saw Dot's eager expression, his heart softened. Just then his stomach rumbled. He sighed, then scanned his mindscape. His eyes brightened. But first he checked the solar battery, still over half-charged. He pulled out an induction cooker. A pot appeared next, which he set carefully in place. He poured in purified water and a fragrant hot pot base. A red and white steam began to swirl as the broth heated. One by one he laid out washed vegetables, frozen lamb rolls, fatty beef slices, pork rolls, and an assortment of dipping sauces. The array of foods was something Uncle Jed and the others had never seen in their lives. "Ethan, are there really so many delicious things outside the Sea of Death?" Uncle Jed asked, eyeing the spread. "And are all these things from beyond the Sea of Death?" Nora added, curiosity bright in her eyes. Ethan thought for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "How much do you know about this world?" he asked. They didn't understand why he'd posed the question. And he couldn't just make up a story. These were all high-tech products from Earth. If he claimed the world beyond the Sea of Death was full of such wonders and they ever went to see it for themselves, they'd find out he'd been lying. Even if he was back home by then, the idea of someone a billion light-years away muttering "Ethan is a liar" made him shudder. Outside, Uncle Jed looked up at the night sky. A distant, almost sorrowful longing settled over his face. "That's a legend," he murmured. "My father told me that our family back in the time of the great ancestor, my distant forebear, was exiled here. He was the first to set foot in this desert." Ethan tilted his head, thinking. The great ancestor? How many generations back was that? Uncle Jed rubbed his beard as if trying to remember. "Including me, I reckon it's been about 9 generations. So that was it." Ethan did a quick count in his mind. 9 generations born and buried in this wasteland. No wonder Uncle Jed sounded so resigned. He was for all intents and purposes a true native. According to the old man, the land beneath their feet was called the Umbral Continent. This planet was known as the Umbral Star. The continent teemed with countless species. Humans were the weakest among them. Yet once, long ages ago, humans had ruled everything here. For reasons no one could recall, they had fallen into decline, becoming the object of hatred for every other race. No one knew exactly when the Sea of Death appeared. But any who were exiled here or who wandered in by accident could never leave. At the sea's edge, an immense barrier loomed. Humans couldn't pass through it. Other races couldn't enter. "You're saying that barrier lets humans in but not out and lets other races out but not in?" Ethan interrupted, frowning. "Yes," Uncle Jed confirmed. He watched Ethan fall silent, deep in thought. "Why?" Ethan asked after a moment. He picked up a slice of meat, dipped it in sauce, and took a bite. Then he swallowed a mouthful of iced beer. "If what you say is true, is this so-called land of exile really just an exile? Have you ever considered that the Sea of Death and that barrier might actually be a way to protect humanity?" The words hung in the air. Uncle Jed froze his hand halfway to his mouth. Then the piece of meat slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground with a soft plop. He stared at Ethan, mind racing. Even Nora fell silent, her expression tense as she turned the idea over. Only Dot kept eating, nibbling green vegetables from the clear broth. She'd never seen such food. Not just her, even Uncle Jed looked bewildered. Only Nora, who'd been the young lady of the Vance family, had occasionally tasted what they called green vegetables in her childhood. Even then, it was a rare luxury. The city lord of Clear Spring City himself couldn't eat them every day. When they were served, it was only a few yellowed leaves on a plate. So when Ethan took out an entire basket just now, it had left them all stunned. Now Ethan's speculation shook them even more. If he was right, the outside world they'd always dreamed of might instead be a place of death. "You're saying that some powerful being drew a line around this desert, set up that barrier, and did it all to protect the human race?" Uncle Jed finally asked. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Ethan only nodded, neither confirming nor denying. Seeing this, Uncle Jed laughed. "You're really dreaming. If such a powerful being wanted to protect us, why wouldn't they choose somewhere beautiful? Mountains, rivers, grasslands? Why pick this godforsaken desert where even birds don't bother to crap?" Nora nodded in agreement. Ethan just shrugged. He didn't know either. But in truth, he was wondering if the desert itself held a secret treasure. Perhaps the one who built the barrier had hidden some final hope for humanity here, a chance for a desperate counterattack. And maybe no one had found it after all these years. As he considered it, a thought crept over him. Could it be that my arrival here isn't just an accident? That the treasure or secret or divine artifact is waiting for me? The idea made his heart race. He felt a laugh bubbling up, and before he could stop it escaped. Ah! His sudden chuckle startled both Nora and Uncle Jed out of their thoughts. They turned and stared at him, their eyes a little wary. Eat, 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 Ethan muttered, trying to cover. He waved his hand, and a bottle of freshly squeezed peach juice appeared on the table. "Oh right, drink this." "Uncle Ethan, what's this?" Dot leaned over the bottle, her wide eyes blinking as she studied the pale liquid. "It's juice, peach-flavored. Nora, you have some too." He poured another glass and held it out to her. Nora looked down at the glass in front of her chest, then lifted her gaze to his face. She hesitated before taking it from his hand. Bowing her head, she whispered a soft, almost inaudible Then she raised the glass and took a tentative sip. Almost instantly her cheeks turned crimson. Ethan frowned, confused. "What's wrong now?" He sat back down and reached for his beer, hoping to cool off, but his glass was gone. A moment later realization dawned. Nora was holding it. The same glass he'd been drinking from. He'd picked it up without thinking and poured juice into it. No wonder she was acting so flustered. Ethan nearly slapped his forehead. He let out a long sigh and thought miserably, "Well, I really didn't mean to." Chapter 363. The Golden Swarm. A feast of otherworldly cookout had Uncle Jed and the others stuffed to the gills. Even Dot was sprawled out, patting her little belly, a half-empty bottle of peach juice clutched tightly in her arms. Uncle Jed, meanwhile, had once again succumbed to his paranoia. He kept muttering to Ethan, his voice a low, insistent drone. "Something's not right." Ethan simply rolled his eyes. He began to perform the technique Uncle Jed had taught him the day before. With each motion, tiny silver specks of light shimmered within the fascia and muscles all over his body. Suddenly Uncle Jed's roar cut through the air. "Nora, Ethan, run!" Ethan, who hadn't even finished what he was doing, jolted upright. He spun around, his soul sense sweeping outward in every direction. Within a 5-kilometer radius nothing seemed out of place. But Uncle Jed had already burst out of the tent, cradled in his arms. Nora followed, scrambling after him. "What are you waiting for? Pack up and run." This old man, always so jumpy, Ethan thought, exasperated. But the next second he felt it. A disturbance on the edge of his perception. The sand began to ripple. He sharpened his focus. Beneath the shifting dunes, tiny fist-sized creatures emerged. They were golden ant-like beings, and in the brief moment Ethan watched, they advanced several hundred meters, moving with astonishing speed. What are those things? His mind raced as he hurriedly stored their belongings. He sprinted after Uncle Jed. "What are they?" "Gold-eater ants," Uncle Jed panted, hauling Nora along while still holding Dot. "I knew something was off. We've wandered into their territory. No wonder the sandworms haven't been chasing us." "That can't be right," Nora called from behind him. The map didn't show any gold-eater ant activity here. "When was that map from?" Uncle Jed snapped, not looking back. Eight years ago, when I left Clear Spring City. It was the latest map I acquired," she admitted, her voice trailing off. Uncle Jed didn't need to say anything more. Ethan understood. 8 years was plenty of time for any creature population to shift. These weren't game-spawn monsters stuck in place. They were living species. As they ran, Ethan kept his soul sense locked on the ants. They weren't targeting them directly, just migrating in their direction. But even so, their speed was terrifying. Uncle Jed, gliding across the sand while carrying Dot and dragging Nora, was still faster than Ethan in his stag form. Ethan realized he hadn't yet mastered how to properly exert force. The stag's run relied on friction and leg power, while Uncle Jed's movement barely disturbed the ground. He skimmed over the sand as if it were water, leaving almost no trace. Ethan, by contrast, kicked up clouds of sand with every stride, each step sinking as though he were stomping through a giant sponge. He thought about trying Uncle Jed's technique but gave up. Without refined control of his muscles, he'd just waste time. Better to keep running, even if it meant throwing up sand behind him. "Uncle Jed, this isn't working. They're getting closer." The gold-eater ants were now only 2 kilometers away and closing fast. "No choice but to run," Uncle Jed called over his shoulder. "They're the apex predators of the Sea of Death. They'll devour everything, living creatures, rock, metal. Doesn't matter." Ethan's blood ran cold. On Earth there was a species much like this, army ants that could strip livestock to bone. It was even said an entire kingdom vanished because of them. "Don't even think about it," Uncle Jed shouted back. "Unless you can fly, just keep running. If you can't, we're gonna die here today." "Fly? Damn. How could I forget?" He skidded to a stop. "Ethan." Nora's voice broke as she saw him freeze in place. "Kid, what are you doing?" Uncle Jed cursed under his breath. He stopped abruptly, set Dot in Nora's arms, and shoved her forward. "You two run. Ethan and I will buy you some time." "Uncle Jed." Nora hesitated, clutching Dot to her chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned and started to run again. She couldn't match Uncle Jed's speed, but she had no choice. For the child in her arms, she had to keep going. Otherwise Ethan and Uncle Jed's sacrifice would mean nothing. Ethan stood perfectly still, channeling his soul power with every ounce of focus. Within his mindscape, he locked onto a target, dragged it out, and hurled it onto the sand. Thud! A colossal object appeared, slamming into the dunes hard enough to shake the ground. What is this? Uncle Jed demanded, eyes wide as he gripped an oversized machete Ethan had previously given him. Car, Ethan said, too busy to explain more. He popped the trunk, pulled out an air needle key, and crouched beside one of the massive tires. Jamming the needle into the valve, he pressed down. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Air began to leak out, slow and steady. Faster, faster. Ethan muttered under his breath, his soul sense flicking between the tire and the approaching swarm. 2 tires were half deflated, but it wasn't enough. The Gold Eater ants were only 800 meters away now. Ethan, what in the hell are you doing? Uncle Jed's voice was tight with panic. Let me help. He darted to the other side of the car, raised the machete, and swung it down toward the tire. Don't. Ethan knew exactly what Uncle Jed intended the moment he moved. He yanked the car's steel frame with a burst of soul power. The 15-ton Predator Beast X lurched sideways, just enough that Uncle Jed's blade missed the tire and clanged off the wheel's steel plate. Get lost, you damn old man. Stop messing around. Ethan roared, cold sweat running down his back. Are you trying to help, or are you in league with those ants? Uncle Jed glared but didn't argue. He knew he'd nearly made, and with the swarm barely 500 meters away, there was no more time to spare. He stomped the sand in frustration, then charged straight toward the ants. Ethan didn't waste time watching him. Someone had to stall the creatures, or none of them would make it out alive. At this point, someone might wonder why Ethan would bring out the Predator Beast X only to deflate its tires rather than simply driving away. The answer was simple. On soft sand, fully inflated tires had no traction. The wheels would just spin and bury themselves deeper. Deflating them increased the contact surface and grip, allowing the car to move without sinking. While the Predator Beast X's wide tires were designed for rough terrain, Ethan needed every bit of acceleration he could get. The ant's speed easily outmatched the vehicle's maximum of 120 kilometers per hour. As the third tire sagged halfway flat, Uncle Jed reached the swarm. He bent low, swung the machete in a wide arc, and sent the first ant flying. The entire mass of golden bodies froze as if shocked. A heartbeat later, they surged forward in perfect unison, pouring toward him like a living tide. Uncle Jed swung furiously, knocking one after another aside. The blade rang with metallic clinks each time it struck the ant's chitin. But fighting them at ground level was exhausting. Ethan glanced up and saw that, after only a few swings, the machete was already chipped and notched along the edge. Chapter 364. The Golden Swarm 2. Ethan watched as Uncle Jed's blade chipped after only a few swings. He finally understood. These golden creatures weren't just ants. They were solid masses of incredibly dense alloy. More and more Gold Eater ants swarmed toward Uncle Jed, forcing him to retreat and parry. The ants moved in layers, rolling over each other in a wave-like attack. Uncle Jed, where's your spear? Ethan called out, seeing how clumsy and desperate his movements had become. All at once, he remembered the spear he'd given him. Uncle Jed hadn't been carrying it these past few days, and Ethan had completely forgotten. That night, I stuck it in the ground and couldn't find it, Uncle Jed shouted back. Ethan knew exactly which night he meant, the night of the meteor fall. Catch! He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a spear-shaped weapon. This was an artifact-tier survival spear from the Carnage faction. He'd planned to trade it for something valuable the next time he ran into Longer Than Luffy. But now there was no choice. What good was a weapon's worth if you lost your life? Uncle Jed reached for it without hesitation. The spear was shaped like a sea dragon, the tip protruding from its gaping mouth. The shaft looked like the dragon's scaled body, covered in bumpy ridges for grip. When Ethan first held it, he immediately realized weapons here had real weight, unlike in Ethereal, where everything felt weightless until you were too weak to lift it and got a cannot wield message. Compared to his Twilight War spear, this weapon was still light, but it was no toy. The moment Uncle Jed's hands closed around it, his entire posture shifted. He transformed. The spear moved like a living serpent darting from its lair. Every ant that came near was swept aside. A few that touched the tip simply exploded. What a spear! Uncle Jed exclaimed, his eyes bright. He knew too well how hard the Gold Eater ants were. Nothing could pierce their defenses, yet this spear was slicing through them with ease. It had to be divine tier. Even as he marveled, he felt a pang of alarm. Where had Ethan gotten so many weapons? On the Sea of Death, all the blacksmiths were concentrated in 4 cities. Iron ore was scarce and smelting technology was crude. Even a simple iron blade marked a person as powerful. Back in the Butcher tribe, he'd spent years making do with stone tools. The silver spear he'd used in the Forgotten City was merely iron, yet people had schemed to steal it. Now armed properly, Uncle Jed became a force of nature. For a while, he held back the relentless rolling attack. but more and more gold-eater ants converged from every direction and the pressure mounted. A single human strength, no matter how fierce, couldn't hold off a swarming species forever. Clank, clank, clank. Thud. A deep, massive sound echoed from afar. At the edge of Ethan's soul sense, something gigantic broke through the sand. Two enormous claws erupted from below, slamming to the surface with a crash that made the ground tremble. Ethan froze, hand still on the air valve key. What in the hell was this thing? Its head alone was at least 30 meters wide. The creature looked eerily like the mole crickets he'd seen back on Earth, but in all his life Ethan had never heard of one this size. He'd already been shocked enough by the fist-sized ants. The Deathstalker scorpion 7 or 8 meters long had seemed monstrous enough. But this was beyond belief. Ethan, this is a migration. We're blocking their path, Uncle Jed said, his voice strained. If they were just foraging, the Ant King Guardian wouldn't be here. That means the Gold-Eater Ant King itself is close. We have to run. How much longer until you're ready? We can't deal with that thing. Even as he spoke, the creature hauled itself fully from the sand. Thud. Another colossal head burst out next to it. Get in. Ethan snapped. He yanked the car door open, climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, shifted gears, and floored the accelerator in one fluid motion. What the Uncle Jed began seeing the vehicle already rolling forward. He swung his spear in a wide arc, scattering the ants, then turned and sprinted after the car. Uncle Jed. Hurry. Ethan leaned out the window, waving him on. You damn kid, wait for me. Uncle Jed bellowed, pumping his legs as fast as they would go. Wait for what? Ethan shouted back, pointing behind them. If you tell me that thing can't fly, I'll wait for you. Damn. It can't fly, it really can't fly, Uncle Jed panted. He glanced over his shoulder just as the Ant King Guardian shuddered and began to move. It was faster than the smaller ants by far, and as it advanced, all the others split away, surging around it like a tide. Ethan spotted the gap immediately. This was his chance. He wouldn't have to slow down and risk the ants swarming the rear. But then he narrowed his eyes. It really can't fly? He'd seen mole crickets on Earth lift off. Really? Uncle Jed shouted back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Oh. Then you can't boss me around anymore, and you can't stop me from eating lunch. Ethan yelled half out the window. He hadn't forgotten how Uncle Jed once made him train with steel plates strapped to his back and refused to let him eat. You little brat. You hold grudges too much. Not letting you eat was for your own good, to push your muscle potential to the limit, Uncle Jed called, still sprinting. Oh? Ethan lifted an eyebrow, half convinced. Really? Really? Uncle Jed was clearly desperate. Ethan finally pressed the clutch and let the car slow to a crawl. All right, I'll believe you this time. Uncle Jed leaped inside. Though the ants had scattered, they were still pursuing from every direction. Suddenly a faint blue light glimmered in Ethan's eyes, and a cold, invisible pressure burst outward. Blue Dragon's intimidation. But Uncle Jed's heart clenched. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a hollow, resonant dragon's roar. The front ranks of gold-eater ants slammed to a dead stop as if they'd run into an invisible wall. The ones behind crashed into them in a chaotic heap. Ethan stomped the accelerator. The Predator Beast X shot forward, pinning Uncle Jed against his seat. Ethan grinned back. Uncle Jed knew without a doubt the kid had been playing him. What was that ability you just used? Why didn't you do it earlier? I was out there fighting for my life. Ethan rolled his eyes. Earlier? Then you wouldn't have had time to get in the car. Uncle Jed fell silent, though his thoughts were churning. He knew those creatures were controlled by the Ant King and had no minds of their own. If Ethan's power only worked once as a disruption, using it too soon could have made them immune, just like the kid implied. For all Ethan's laid-back attitude, he clearly wasn't as thoughtless as he acted. Meanwhile, Ethan, still flooring the gas toward Nora, was thinking privately. If that little dragon in the egg hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten I even had that skill. The effect was just as Uncle Jed suspected. Only effective as a surprise. A second attempt probably wouldn't work. What surprised Ethan most was what the dragon had told him. The gold-eater ants carried a faint trace of dragon blood. He couldn't imagine how ants and dragons could ever be connected. Up ahead, Nora and Dot were still running when they heard a beep behind them. Ethan leaned out the window, waving both arms. Nora turned in surprise as the strange boxy machine rolled toward her. Uncle Jed flung the door open, and as they passed, he scooped up Nora and Dot in one fluid motion. But in the distance, the Ant King Guardian had pulled far ahead of the main swarm and was barreling straight for them. Its lumbering strides were somehow faster than the Predator Beast X at top speed. As soon as Nora and Dot tumbled into the car, Ethan glanced back, then looked forward with a glint in his eyes. Hold on tight, he said, his voice carrying a note of excitement. Uncle Jed and Nora exchanged an incredulous look. What's there to be excited about at a time like this? Then Ethan flipped open a hidden panel near the gear shift. Inside were 10 bright red buttons. Chapter 365. Descent into the Sands. Ethan stared at the row of 10 red buttons. He remembered the day Williams had pulled him aside, dragging him into the garage after he'd returned from the Silverwood family. Williams hadn't said much. He'd simply lifted the tarp to show him this. The moment Ethan laid eyes on those buttons, he knew exactly what they were. However, most acceleration systems only came with 1 or 2 buttons. Williams had gone much further. He'd modified the Predator Beast X with a full set of 10. And he'd warned Ethan not to use them lightly. When Ethan asked why, Williams had only given a mysterious smile and said, just add wings and it'll fly. The Predator Beast already had more than enough armor to shrug off most attacks, but its weakness was its speed, only 120 kilometers per hour at best. Williams had solved that problem perfectly. Now Ethan glanced over his shoulder and called out, hold on tight. He didn't bother telling Uncle Jed or Nora to buckle up. Even if he had, they wouldn't have known what a seatbelt was. Here we go. He pressed the first button. Out here in this endless desert, he wanted to see just how fast this so-called flying tank really was. Boom! The engine erupted in a roar that rattled every bone in Ethan's chest. For a moment he wondered if the thing was about to explode. Williams had insisted the internal systems were fine, that almost everything inside had been replaced. But it was Ethan's first time using it and he couldn't help worrying. Boom! 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 Whoosh! Holy cow! The sudden acceleration slammed him back in the seat so hard he nearly blacked out. Beside the original dashboard, the secondary speedometer, which had never moved before, began to climb. 140, 180, 260, 320. Ethan's gaze locked on the needle. The gauge maxed out at 380. At last the needle stopped at 340, trembling but holding steady. He felt a surge of disbelief. How had Williams managed this? That speed was outrageous. No, it wasn't an airplane, but it was faster than most helicopters. Add wings and it'll fly, Williams had said, and he hadn't been exaggerating. The only reason they hadn't lifted off the ground altogether was the Predator Beast's 15-ton weight. That mass kept it gripping the sand instead of tumbling end over end. Any normal vehicle would have gone airborne and vanished into the dunes. In the rearview mirror, Ethan saw the massive mole crickets shrinking in the distance. For 40 seconds they held that blistering speed. When the acceleration finally cut out, the engine growled and the vehicle lurched, slowing back to normal. Even then, Ethan could still see the creatures pursuing them. But in those 40 seconds they'd put nearly 4 kilometers between themselves and the monsters. The mole crickets, however, weren't giving up. Ethan gritted his teeth and slammed a second button. The Predator Beast surged forward again. He watched the seconds tick by counting down in his mind. As soon as the speed began to taper, he punched the third button without hesitation. A shrill alarm blared through the cabin, accompanied by a flat mechanical voice. Engine overheating. Cooling system insufficient power. Engine overheating. Cooling system insufficient power. Damn it, Ethan muttered. This wasn't Williams' fault. The cooling system had never been designed to handle 3 accelerations in a row. On Earth, 1 burst of speed was usually enough to lose any pursuer. But here they had no choice. Ethan, turn now. Uncle Jed's voice thundered from the back seat. Ethan was so focused on the engine temperature gauge that he hadn't looked ahead in minutes. He'd also shifted his soul sense, narrowing it into a backward-facing fan to watch the mole crickets. That let him sense farther behind them, but it left the ground ahead blind. The second Uncle Jed yelled, Ethan's eyes shot up, and his heart stopped. A colossal quicksand pit easily a kilometer across yawned before them. Damn my luck, he thought, panic crawling up his spine. If the pit had appeared a few seconds earlier, he would have seen it. Now it was too late. At 340 kilometers per hour, turning in the desert was nearly impossible. He yanked the steering wheel anyway, desperate to change direction, but the Predator Beast X plowed ahead with unstoppable force. Its immense weight and momentum left no time to think. In the blink of an eye, the vehicle hurled itself over the edge and plunged straight down. Just before impact, the car's system chimed in with icy calm. Impact distance detected, 50 meters. Speed, 340 kilometers per hour. Safety system activated. All airbags deploying. With a muffled roar, every airbag burst from the panels, beneath their feet, along the sides, over their laps, filling the interior until there was no room left to move. The next instant, Ethan felt himself pinned in place. Even with all that cushioning, the impact smashed into him like a battering ram. A bright flare of pain shot through his skull, and then everything went black. Somewhere far away, he heard the airbags deflating. Oxygen deficiency detected in vehicle. Vehicle sealed. Oxygen supply system activated. Duration, 8 hours. But none of them were awake to hear the warning. Outside, the sands flowed around the half-buried wreck like water around a sinking ship. The Predator Beast settled deeper inch by inch. Inside, silence took hold. If Ethan had been conscious, he would have thanked Williams for thinking of everything. Williams hadn't only modified the acceleration. He'd installed the full airbag array and programmed it to deploy automatically if an impact was inevitable. At 340 kilometers per hour, 1 second of travel meant nearly 100 meters. The moment the sensors detected 50 meters left, there was no chance to stop. If not for that system, none of them would have survived. Not even Ethan's bare form could have saved him from a collision at that speed. Time crawled by. Once every hour, the oxygen system's voice spoke up, calm and unhurried, reminding the empty cabin how little time remained. Not long after the 7th reminder, Ethan's fingers twitched. He sucked in a breath, eyes cracking open. Everything was blurry and tinted red, the alarm light still flashing overhead. Groaning, he lifted his head and realized he was sprawled against the front windshield. He pushed himself upright and turned. Uncle Jed, Nora, and Dot were all slumped in their seats, motionless. Heart hammering, he crawled back to Dot first, checking her breathing. Relief washed over him. She was alive, only unconscious. One by one, he checked the others, finding no serious injuries. He exhaled shakily. Nora let out a faint groan, eyelids fluttering open. Uncle Jed stirred at the same time, followed by Dot. Damn. My arm hurts like hell, Uncle Jed growled. Ethan looked closer and saw his shoulder sitting at an awkward angle. Uncle Jed glanced down, braced himself, and with a wet crunch shoved it back into place. Ethan winced at the sound. That man was built out of iron. Where are we? Nora's voice was small and unsteady as she hugged Dot closer. Probably under the sand. Ethan peered through the windows. All he could see was endless yellow grains pressing against the glass. Oxygen supply system. 50 minutes remaining. The voice returned, and this time everyone heard it. Ethan's expression darkened. The system was designed to last 8 hours. If there were only 50 minutes left, they'd been unconscious for over 7. Ethan. What now? Uncle Jed asked, his tone low but steady. Ethan didn't answer. He shut his eyes, gathering himself. Then he reached out with his soul sense, letting it expand outward. If they didn't find a way out of this buried tomb, they had less than an hour left to breathe. All he could do was hope his soul sense would find them a path to the surface, and a chance to live. Chapter 366. Buried alive. 10 minutes later. Oxygen supply system. 40 minutes remaining. Ethan opened his eyes as the electronic voice chimed. His face was grim. He had just compressed his soul sense into a single thread, probing upward. The compressed soul sense stretched in a straight line, reaching over 4,000 meters underground. But it wasn't enough. He still hadn't seen the surface. Adjusting his direction, Ethan spent another 10 minutes scanning almost every angle around them. All he sensed was endless yellow sand. It was as if sand was the only substance left in the world. And he realized with a sinking feeling that they were still slowly descending. About 8 hours earlier, the sand had started swallowing them, dragging them to an unknown depth far beyond 4,000 meters. Even if the flow stopped, climbing out would be impossible. If they dared to leave the vehicle, they'd suffocate within minutes. What to do? This was the most serious crisis Ethan had ever faced. And he wasn't even sure whether dying here would mean truly dying. Damn it. I didn't die on the battlefield only to suffocate in this place. Uncle Jed slammed the seat in front of him. His voice was rough, bordering on desperation. Should have known. I would have gladly fought that giant ant. Better than dying like this. Ethan was already in no mood for complaints. He glared at Uncle Jed, ready to snap at him, but before he could speak, the vehicle lurched, suddenly dropping several meters. The floor shuddered beneath their feet. This time Uncle Jed didn't dare say another word. But Ethan's eyes lit up and the rebuke died in his throat. He remembered something he'd read about quicksand. When underground sand encounters water, and the pressure shifts, the mixture can start flowing like liquid. Or sometimes a hidden cavity collapses, forming a vortex that pulls everything down. In the latter case, the sinkage stops once the cavity is filled. But they were still descending, which meant there was either an underground river beneath them, or a much larger cavity. Either way, if they could reach the bottom, there might be a chance. Thinking quickly, Ethan stomped his foot against the floor. Thud. The vehicle dropped faster. Ethan, are you crazy? Uncle Jed's eyes widened in disbelief. Nora, Vance, and Dot seemed worse off, dazed and too frightened to speak. Ordinary people simply couldn't compare to Ethan and Uncle Jed when it came to enduring stress. Stop grumbling. Help me. Ethan snapped, then began shaking the vehicle with both hands, making it sway from side to side. The descent speed increased again. Uncle Jed clenched his jaw and joined him. The vehicle trembled under their combined effort. Oxygen supply system. 30 minutes remaining. Ethan extended his soul sense downward again. Even within 4,000 meters, he still couldn't sense the bottom. His heart sank, but there was no other option. He kept shaking the vehicle. Oxygen supply system. 20 minutes remaining. Oxygen supply system. 10 minutes remaining. Oxygen supply system. 1 minute remaining. Time was running out. Ethan and Uncle Jed were drenched in sweat, muscles aching. The quicksand felt bottomless. In the past half hour they had already descended a full 5 kilometers. Now, with only seconds of oxygen left, despair flooded everyone's eyes. Oxygen supply system. Offline. In-vehicle oxygen remaining. Maximum 3 minutes. Please evacuate the vehicle immediately. Ethan felt a surge of frustration so strong he could barely breathe. He had prepared so many supplies in his mindscape space. Why hadn't he thought of oxygen equipment? 3 minutes. That was all they had left. Across from him, Nora Vance was holding Dot close. She cupped the little girl's face, staring at her as if trying to memorize every detail. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Dot asked softly, her voice muffled by her mother's arms. She was still too young to understand. "Nothing. Nothing." Nora forced a smile even as tears streamed down her cheeks. She tried to sound soothing, but her voice cracked. For a moment the vehicle fell into heavy silence. Ethan simply sank down against the wall, exhausted. Without their shaking, the descent slowed again, almost to a stop. Seconds ticked by. The only sound was the faint rustling of sand against the hull. Then Uncle Jed pulled out his chipped machete. He looked up at Nora and Dot. Nora froze and Ethan flinched, fearing the worst. But Uncle Jed's eyes were clear, almost calm. "I'll go first," he said hoarsely. "You all can live a little longer." He pressed the blade against his own neck. "Uncle Jed." Nora's tears flowed faster, her lips trembling. "Uncle Jed." "No." Ethan's voice rang out suddenly. "We still have a chance." Uncle Jed hesitated. Nora turned to look at Ethan, her hope flickering like a candle in the wind. Ethan's eyes were blazing now. Just seconds before, his soul sense had stretched farther downward. For an instant he felt the resistance lighten. His perception slipped through the sand and reached a huge cavity. Because nothing blocked it, his soul sense extended further, and he saw water. An underground river. "There's an underground river channel below," he shouted, his voice ragged with urgency. "If we follow it we can get out." "Really?" Uncle Jed asked, his voice shaking. "How much further?" Ethan froze. The excitement drained from his face. He swallowed, feeling his heart seize. Yes, how much further? He knew the end of his soul sense was still 4,000 meters away. At their current descent speed they would need at least 20 minutes to reach it. And there wasn't enough air left for even 2. His expression told them everything. Uncle Jed's shoulders slumped. Nora clutched Dot tighter, her knuckles white. The dread in the air was suffocating. They couldn't just wait to die. "Speed up." Ethan's mind raced. "We need more speed." "Uncle Jed." Ethan met his eyes, voice urgent. "Listen to me." "What is it?" "Quick," Uncle Jed demanded. Ethan pulled him to the center of the vehicle and positioned him on the left side. "Use your force resonance. Exert all your strength as thrust. No holding back." He kicked aside a seat in the way, pointing to a reinforced spot on the hull. "Here, focus it right here." Uncle Jed looked at him, realizing what he intended. Using force resonance meant exhaling after each exertion, which would burn through their last traces of oxygen. But Ethan's determination left no room for argument. Without hesitation, Uncle Jed pressed his palms against the spot. Ethan climbed to the opposite side and braced his own hand on the roof. The vehicle hung nose first, still descending at a crawl. "Uncle Jed, get ready. On my count 3 we push together." "All right." Uncle Jed exhaled, steadying himself. But Ethan didn't start immediately. Instead he climbed to the last row, unbuckled the seatbelts and secured Nora and Dot to their seats. Then he pulled out a rope and tied Uncle Jed to the back of his own seat. Only then did he lash himself in. He looked across the dim cabin. "This is our last chance. 1, 2, 3, go." Their muscles tensed, veins standing out under their skin. Force resonance made the air shimmer faintly like heat waves. Thump. The impact threw them backward, but the vehicle's body rotated in the sand. The descent speed surged, then stopped again. Ethan's heart hammered. It worked. Uncle Jed looked back at him, wide-eyed. "Harder. Keep going." Thump, thump, thump. They struck again and again in perfect unison. Outside, the nose-down Predator Beast X began to rotate faster, like a drill burrowing through the sand. If anyone could have seen it, they would have thought the machine was alive, straining to claw its way to freedom. Inside, Ethan thanked every bit of luck that Uncle Jed had trained him this way. Without both of them generating force at the same time, the vehicle would never have spun. Time blurred. The rotation grew so fast that the entire cabin vibrated, the walls creaking under the pressure. 30 seconds before the oxygen had run out. Nora and Dot hung limp in their seatbelts, eyes congested and unfocused. Their chests rose in shallow gasps as their bodies fought for any trace of air. Uncle Jed's face turned red. His veins bulged, eyes bloodshot. Every heartbeat thundered painfully in Ethan's ears. 200 meters left. 150. Ethan's vision turned red. His hearing faded to a dull, pulsing roar. He could hardly feel his own hands. His thoughts grew slow and heavy, slipping away like sand between his fingers. Then, suddenly, the resistance vanished. Boom! The Predator Beast X burst through the dome of the cavity, spinning wildly. It slammed nose first into the sand pile below. Yellow dust exploded in every direction. The impact was enormous. Between that and the suffocation, Ethan's consciousness finally went black. His last thought was fierce and bright. We're saved. If the air system still works. After that, everything went silent. Uncle Jed, Nora Vance, and Dot passed out beside him. External air detected as normal. Opening natural ventilation system. The Predator Beast X, after rolling countless times, finally settled. Beep. Hiss. Fresh air flowed in as the sealed ventilation ports opened, filling the cabin with life again. Chapter 367. Unseen Depths. Ethan stirred, a hazy sensation flooding his mouth. The roar of rushing water filled his ears. Slowly he opened his eyes. A blinding light forced him to shield his face with one hand. You're awake. It was Nora Vance's voice. Ethan quickly sat up, blinking against the brightness. He realized it was the Predator Beast X's headlights blazing across the cavern. Nora stood nearby holding a bottle of mineral water. Beside her were Uncle Jed and Dot, still unconscious. He hadn't expected Nora to be the first to wake up. She'd even managed to pull them all out of the vehicle and get the headlights working. The water, of course, had come from the vehicle's supplies. How long have you been awake? Ethan rubbed his throbbing head. Nora wiped sweat from her forehead, offering a tired smile. Just got you all out. Seeing her smile, Ethan couldn't help but smile back. This time they had truly escaped death. He never imagined that beneath the sea of death at some unknown depth there would be such a massive underground river. Under the harsh white beams of the headlights, the terrain came into focus. A huge stone dome arched overhead, cracked by a large ragged hole. Sand still poured down through it in a steady whispering stream. The falling sand spilled into the river channel, disappearing with the current. It had become a funnel drawing everything down. Unless the underground river dried up or the entire dome collapsed to seal it with debris, that quicksand pit above would never vanish. How's Dot? Ethan stood up, slowly testing his balance. She's fine, just fainted from lack of oxygen. Nora knelt beside Dot, gently stroking her hair. How did you get us out? What did you use to open the vehicle door? Ethan asked, glancing at the Predator Beast X's warped frame. I used your fingerprint to unlock it. Nora stood and laughed, as if proud of her cleverness. Oh, Ethan frowned slightly. A thought struck him out of nowhere. Dot's birthday is coming up, isn't it? What date was it again? Nora's expression faltered. She hesitated, her eyes shifting. Ethan stepped forward and seized her by the throat. Who are you? Where is Nora Vance? Her feet kicked at the ground, hands clawing at his arm. Ethan, what's wrong? I am Nora Vance. Is that so? Then why don't you even know Dot's birthday? He tightened his grip, feeling her pulse flutter. You're still trying to fool me. You don't know because I never knew, so you had nothing to copy. Nora gasped, her face paling. Ethan's voice dropped cold and sure. And you used my fingerprint to open the door. The real Nora wouldn't even know what a fingerprint scanner is. And you definitely don't know that even if someone recovers from suffocation, the bloodshot eyes wouldn't clear that quickly. The moment the sound slipped into the air, the thing in his hands changed. It shrank, its skin peeling back into scales. In a heartbeat, Nora dissolved into a blood-red snake no thicker than a spoon. It lunged for Ethan's arm, fangs glinting. What the? Terror shot up his spine. He had always been afraid of snakes. He squeezed reflexively, hand clamping shut. Splat. The snake burst under his grip, a wet shock splattering his skin. But before he could even draw breath, the world jolted. Ethan's eyes snapped open again. He was still inside the Predator Beast X. His body was bound tight with ropes hanging from a support beam. His hand felt sticky. He lifted it, heart hammering. A crushed red snake lay coiled in his palm, limp. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The noise grew louder, seeping into every corner of the vehicle. Cold dread crawled down his back, raising goosebumps. A sweet, cloying scent filled the air. Slowly he turned his head. In the pulsing red glow of the emergency lights, he saw them, hundreds, maybe thousands of red snakes. They filled the Predator Beast X, coiling over every surface, writhing in a seething carpet of scales. Ethan's mouth went dry. He could barely swallow. What was happening? The vehicle was sealed tighter than a vault. Even if the ventilation system had failed, there was an isolation shield. Nothing should have been able to get in. A sharp pain stabbed his shoulder. He jerked violently and his eyes flew open again. The snakes vanished. Reality slammed back. A broken military knife protruded from his shoulder. Real pain, hot and deep. Gritting his teeth, Ethan looked up. Uncle Jed stood over him, swaying, his face slack and pale. He muttered in a hollow voice, Die. You all deserve to die. With a wheezing grunt, Jed yanked the knife free. Blood gushed. He raised the blade again. You gotta be kidding me. Ethan gritted his teeth and kicked out hard. His boot caught Jed in the chest, sending him crashing backward. Jed's head struck the vehicle wall with a dull crack. He slumped and didn't move. Ethan wasted no time. He tore at the ropes, freeing himself. His shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it, scanning the cabin. That sweet scent still lingered, cloying in his nose. He hesitated, then realization struck him like cold water. The nitrogen tank. He turned, spotting the tank wedged near the rear. A thin, steady hiss leaked from a crack in its side. The sweet smell was laughing gas, nitrous oxide. No wonder the illusions had felt so real. He'd been hallucinating. He glanced back. Nora Vance was slumped against the wall, her cheeks flushed and her eyes glassy, her hands twitching as if lost in a dream. Ethan sighed. First things first. He untied Dot, scooped her into his arms and carried her outside. Then he returned for Nora and finally dragged the unconscious Uncle Jed out as well. Behind him, the Predator Beast X continued to hiss. He ignored it. Once the gas finished leaking, it would stop. Despite how it was portrayed in movies, nitrous oxide wasn't especially prone to explode. At room temperature, it was inert. Without a strong reducing agent, it was almost impossible to ignite. Ethan reached into his mindscape and retrieved a flashlight. He swept it around, studying the cavern. The place looked exactly like it had in the hallucination. For a moment, doubt prickled at the edge of his mind. Was he still dreaming? But the searing ache in his shoulder was proof enough. This was reality. He drew in a breath and activated his transformation, the tree form. Vines of healing energy crept through the wound. Slowly the bleeding stopped, the torn flesh knitting itself closed. At last, not even a scar remained. His healing skills worked wonders on injuries like this, but he knew too well they were useless against deeper sickness. With the pain subsiding, he walked along the underground river, testing the air. The cavern was vast. Maybe if they followed the water far enough, they'd find a way out. If no exit existed, the air would have long grown stale. They were alive, so there had to be circulation somewhere. Satisfied, he turned back. As he reached the others, Uncle Jed and Nora Vance were sitting up, rubbing their temples. Both looked pale and disoriented. Damn, I'm bleeding, Uncle Jed mumbled, touching the back of his head. Ethan eyed him, exasperated. You're only bleeding a little. I nearly got stabbed to death. He didn't bother saying it aloud. You two rest a bit. We'll follow the river downstream once you're steady. Maybe we'll find an exit. He pulled out some food from his storage space and handed it around. Then he walked over to where the Predator Beast X lay overturned. The hissing had stopped. The vehicle looked worse than ever. Its body was scraped smooth, stripped of paint, the armor dented where he and Uncle Jed had crashed into it during the descent. He sighed, heart sinking. If it hadn't been a Predator Beast X, it would have been crushed outright. Damn it. He shook his head, resigned, and stored the vehicle away. Turning back, he lifted the still unconscious Dot in his arms. Let's move. Uncle Jed rose without complaint. Nora Vance hadn't said a word since waking up. Her eyes kept darting away from Ethan's face. They walked in silence along the river. About 10 minutes in, Ethan's flashlight swept across something that made him stop short. A wooden bridge stretched across the water, its beams slick with moss. Ethan, look. Uncle Jed's voice was hushed. He raised his light. Across the river, a massive stone wall loomed in the darkness. The silhouette was unmistakable, built by human hands. Ethan's heart kicked hard in his chest. Someone had built a city down here. As he lifted his soul sense to probe further, a cold chime sounded in his mind. Ding. System notification. Unknown ancient city ruins discovered. Main quest, explore ruined remnants triggered. Reward item, Bloodline map fragment X1. He exhaled, half amused. Of course. The main quest again, and this time the reward was a Bloodline map fragment. He knew how this worked by now. The so-called reward wasn't simply handed over. He'd have to find it himself, which meant no guarantee of success. Still, could this be the missing fifth fragment he'd heard about? Ethan didn't hesitate. Let's go. We're checking it out. Maybe there's a way back to the surface. He stepped forward, reaching the bridgehead. Uncle Jed followed with a quiet grunt. Nora Vance trailed behind. Chapter 368. Echoes of the Past. Ethan gazed at the wooden bridge ahead. It was dilapidated, utterly impassable. Let's wade across, he suggested after a moment of thought. The riverbed beneath them was quite deep, but the water itself only reached their knees. On both banks, pale marks showed that the water level of this underground river had once risen nearly even with the edges. Now it seemed to be dropping year by year. Uncle Jed volunteered to lead the way. Nora Vance followed behind, and finally Ethan carried Dot in his arms. They crossed the 30-meter-wide river without incident. Walking last, Ethan kept his soul sense extended, constantly probing for any sign of danger. He stepped onto the far bank, feeling a mix of relief and lingering apprehension. Part of him had half expected something strange to happen. Once ashore, he muttered to himself, Damn it, too many TV shows and novels. He'd almost convinced himself some bizarre creature would erupt from the water at any moment. When they finally reached the wall they had spotted from a distance, they realized just how massive it was. The sight reminded Ethan of standing before the gates of the underworld. But this gate looming over them was closed. They walked closer and Ethan reached out to touch the weathered surface. But at that moment something strange happened. Boom! Creak, creak, creak. The gate swung open with a resounding groan, as if his touch alone had woken it from centuries of slumber. Holy cow! Uncle Jed whispered behind him, eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan was just as startled. He extended his soul sense into the widening gap, but another anomaly occurred. The probing sense that usually felt so reliable simply vanished, as if it had been swallowed by the darkness beyond. A cold unease crawled up his spine. Without soul sense there were too many dangers he couldn't predict. For a moment he wanted nothing more than to turn around and leave. But this was a main quest. He was here to complete it. He wondered if the person in his previous life had stood here too, facing the same threshold, before he claimed the Immortality Divine Ability Scroll. Let's go, Ethan said, finally steadying his nerves as he stepped forward into the shadowed hall beyond the gate. As he crossed the threshold a dark shape darted past his eyes. There was something alive in here and it moved fast. His flashlight beam swung after it, but the creature slipped into the darkness before he could get a clear look. What was that? Uncle Jed asked tensely. I don't know, Ethan said, shaking his head. Just be careful. Uncle Jed unslung his spear and held it ready. Nora clutched tighter and followed close behind Ethan. It's too dark, she murmured, her voice tight with fear. Ethan glanced back at her. He considered telling her to wait outside, but he quickly thought better of it. If they found an exit deeper in, he'd have to come all the way back to fetch her. And there was no guarantee it would be safer out there. If she stayed behind, Uncle Jed would have to protect her, splitting their strength. He sighed inwardly. Better to stay together. He'd just have to watch over them as best he could. Nora caught his eye and flushed pink. Ethan frowned slightly. Ever since she had woken up down here she'd been acting strangely. He couldn't figure out why. Remembering the hallucinations, he thought again of how she had appeared to him as that small red snake he dreaded so much. Was there some connection between what he'd seen and this place? As for Uncle Jed's visions, whatever they'd been, they clearly dredged up something he didn't want to remember. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear the tangled thoughts. He turned back to the path and led them forward in silence. They had only walked 100 paces when, but the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Ethan froze, scanning the darkness. A moment later he felt a surge of elemental fluctuation, the kind that rippled through ethereal whenever a mage began to chant a spell. He turned toward the source of the disturbance. In the distance an eerie scene unfolded. One by one the ancient structures began to glow with a pale, wavering light. It was as if the entire city had been asleep and was now slowly coming alive. The illumination spread, moving like a tide until it reached the massive gate behind them. Creak, creak, creak. With another drawn-out groan the gate began to close. The sudden transformation left them all staring in disbelief. What had been a world of pitch black was now suffused with pale brightness. The light erased much of Ethan's unease, though not all of it. They could finally see the terrain around them clearly. The city walls were made of stone, but everything else, roads, buildings, and pillars, was covered in colossal withered trees. Gnarled roots twisted across the ground on either side of their path. Straight ahead toward the heart of the city towered a vast ancient tree. Its sprawling branches stretched up to support the vaulted dome overhead. The glow came from its canopy, casting its strange illumination over everything. Let's go take a look, Ethan said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Beneath this sea of death an entire city had once thrived. A city built not of stone and steel but of living things. Even Uncle Jed looked dazed. No one could have imagined what this place must have looked like millions of years ago. They began walking toward the massive tree at the center. Apart from the fleeting shadow earlier, nothing else seemed to threaten them. The tree was the obvious place to search for answers. Though the trunk appeared close, they walked for 2 hours without reaching it. The scale of the city warped all sense of distance. Ethan eventually called a halt, judging they'd only covered about a third of the way. It was as if they had shrunk while the trees had grown impossibly vast. He set down his pack and passed out some food. Dot had remained unconscious all this time, but now she stirred with a faint whimper. Her eyelids fluttered open. Ethan and Uncle Jed moved to her side at once. The little girl blinked up at them, her gaze vacant. Dot. What's wrong? Don't scare Mommy. Nora's voice cracked as she reached for her daughter. Ethan quickly took out a bottle of peach juice and a banana, trying to coax Dot to react. But she didn't so much as look at them. A chill spread through his chest. Could she have suffered brain damage from inhaling too much laughing gas? He knew how dangerous it could be. On Earth countless young people had become addicted to it, and many had died. When laughing gas was first discovered, it had been used in anesthesia back when medicine had few alternatives. But once safer options came along, it was abandoned, only to be picked up by profiteers who peddled it illegally. For a while, regulation was so lax that online markets were flooded with the stuff. Authorities struggled to crack down because the damage it caused was hard to classify conclusively. Eventually, the US had stepped in and designated it a controlled third-generation drug. He remembered all too well the signs of heavy exposure: glassy eyes, nerve damage, paralysis. Dot's vacant stare made his heart pound faster. What if... Eek! Ooh! A sudden cry yanked his attention away. Not far off, a dark shadow had appeared, emitting a series of odd warbling sounds. Ethan snapped around, eyes narrowing. He braced for an attack. But when his flashlight caught the creature, he froze. It looked like a tiny monkey covered in golden yellow, fur no taller than 30 centimeters. Uncle Jed raised his spear, but the little creature squealed in alarm and leapt back with astonishing speed. Ethan realized he'd only be able to match it by activating Swift Stride in his panther form. "Don't move," he said, quickly lifting a hand. "It means no harm." The monkey seemed to understand. It bared its small teeth in a show of defiance and hopped back to where it had first appeared. "Eek!" "Ooh!" pointed at Ethan, chattering urgently. Then, without warning, it threw itself down onto the ground and began convulsing, froth bubbling at the corners of its mouth. Ethan stared, stunned. What was it doing? Was it trying to tell them something? Or... His eyes widened as he watched it twitch and shudder. Did it just die? Chapter 369. The Prankster's Bargain. Ethan watched as the creature, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, suddenly sprang to its feet with a nimble backflip. Oh! It began gesturing wildly in a flurry of bizarre movements. Ethan paused, taken aback by both the sudden appearance and the stranger behavior of the animal. It was hard to make sense of any of it, but at least it didn't seem hostile. He wondered if it might have any companions lurking nearby. "What's wrong?" As Ethan was lost in thought, Nora's distressed cry pierced the air. Everyone flinched, startled by the sudden outburst. Nestled in Nora's arms, had started to convulse, foam bubbling at the corners of her mouth. Just my luck, Ethan thought grimly. What I feared most is happening. He stepped forward quickly, gently prying open Dot's mouth and sliding a spoon crosswise between her teeth to keep her from biting her tongue. "Ethan, what do we do?" Nora sobbed, her voice thick with tears. She clung to his shirt, her composure unraveling. "What do I do?" His mind raced. He had no idea. He couldn't promise everything would be fine when Dot's condition clearly said otherwise. But if he admitted how bad it was, Nora would only sink deeper into panic. The strange monkey chattered again, clapping its hands like it found the whole scene amusing. "You little beast!" Uncle Jed growled, raising his spear to shoo it away. Ethan quickly stopped him and stood, brow furrowed. A thought struck him. He remembered how the monkey had been on the ground moments ago, convulsing just like Dot was now. Could it be? His eyes widened. He crouched down closer to the creature. "Were you trying to warn us she was about to have a seizure?" The monkey bounced excitedly, smacking its own head, then pointing at Dot and at Ethan. More precisely, it pointed at the banana in Ethan's hand. "You want this?" Ethan held the banana out slowly. "Ethan, it's just a begging animal," Uncle Jed said, impatiently eyeing Dot's limp body. "Focus on the girl. Think of something, anything, to help her." "I'd use it if I had any plan at all," Ethan thought, exasperated. "This monkey isn't ordinary. You saw it. It predicted Dot's condition was about to worsen." He looked up at Uncle Jed, then tossed the banana toward the monkey. Caught it neatly with one hand and bit in. The next second it shuddered and spat the piece out in a rapid-fire stream like it had bitten something vile. Ethan almost laughed. Apparently it had never eaten a banana before. He took out another and demonstrated how to peel it. The little creature tilted its head skeptical and scratched its ear. After a moment's hesitation, it picked up the discarded banana, copied Ethan's motions, licked the fruit cautiously, then jumped up with excitement and stuffed it into its mouth. It turned and beckoned to Ethan, clearly wanting more. Ethan held up the bunch and bounced it in his palm. "Want more? I have plenty. But first, tell me, how did you know she was going to seize?" He pointed at Dot, trying to coax an answer. "Squeak, squeak." The monkey looked stumped. It scratched its head, hopped in a circle, then with a sudden whoosh darted away and vanished among the withered trees. Seeing it flee, Ethan's heart sank. "I told you. What good is an animal? Ow." Uncle Jed grumbled, turning just in time for a stone to smack him on the back of the head. Squeak, squeak. The monkey had returned. Uncle Jed cursed and rubbed the sore spot, wincing where the stone had struck an old scar. But the creature ignored him completely. It swaggered up, stopping in front of Nora. She instinctively shielded Dot closer to her chest. Squeak, squeak. With an irritable chitter, the monkey stretched out its left hand. A small luminous seed rested in its palm, glowing faintly. Ethan squinted. It looked like the seed of some unknown plant. Ooh. The monkey gestured insistently toward Dot's mouth. Are you saying this will cure her? Ethan asked carefully. It actually nodded. Ethan's pulse quickened. He reached out to take the seed, but the monkey jerked back, refusing. Ethan blinked confused and watched as the creature made an elaborate show of puffing up and scattering a handful of dirt at him. He coughed, brushing grit off his face. It says, "The primal element seed, if you hold it in your hand, will just turn to useless dirt." Dot's voice, thin and shaky, rose between them. Everyone turned stunned. She had stopped convulsing but looked exhausted and pale. Dot, you can understand it? Uncle Jed asked, eyes wide. Yes. Dot rasped. Uncle Jed's expression changed from shock to amazement. He pointed at the monkey. What did it call that? The primal element seed? Are you serious? That's a legendary elixir. When I was in the Forgotten City, the city lord spent a fortune searching the entire Sea of Death for it, and never found even one. Ethan knelt beside Dot. What does it do? It treats soul damage, increases perception, Dot murmured, and its most important effect, it allows anyone to sense the energy of the world, Nora finished quietly. Uncle Jed gave her a look of respect, as expected of someone from the Vance family. You've seen this before? Nora nodded, her gaze fixed on the shimmering seed. I've seen it in our ancestral records. It really is the primal element seed. Then let it give it to Dot, Ethan urged. Treating nerve damage is exactly what she needs. But this is priceless, Nora whispered, glancing up at him. What if it is? Ethan said firmly. No treasure is more valuable than a human life. Uncle Jed swallowed hard. He looked at Ethan with new respect, repeating those words in his mind. He knew well, one seed like this could buy a lifetime of power. To sense the energy of the world was to hold the key to becoming a priest. And priests were more sought after than kings. Yet Ethan had no hint of greed in his voice. Thank you, Nora said, her eyes glistening. Ooh. The monkey suddenly let out an impatient chatter, waving the seed in the air. Says, do you want it or not? Dot translated weakly. If you don't hurry, its energy will fade. Ethan noticed the glow on the seed already dimming. He nodded quickly. Nora moved Dot forward, supporting her carefully. But the monkey still didn't hand it over. It eyed the group shrewdly, then began gesturing again. Dot hesitated, looking reluctant. Dot, what's it saying? Ethan asked. It wants 10 bunches of bananas and 5 bottles of Uncle Ethan's peach juice, she mumbled. But that's Dot's favorite drink. Dot doesn't want to trade it. Ethan let out a startled laugh. Even Uncle Jed chuckled despite the tension. The monkey tilted its head, puzzled, and looked at Dot expectantly. Doesn't understand why you're laughing. Is peach juice not valuable? Dot translated, blinking tiredly. It's very valuable, Ethan said with a grin. Don't worry. Then, will you trade? Of course, Ethan replied. Then, it wants to see the goods first, Dot translated. You clever little bandit, Uncle Jed muttered. Ethan pulled out a huge bunch of bananas and 5 bottles of peach juice from his mindscape. The monkey's eyes went round. It jumped up, snatched the peach juice, and finally tossed the seed into Ethan's hands. He passed it to Nora without delay. She placed it carefully on Dot's tongue. Dot swallowed, and in seconds her pallor began to fade. Her eyes fluttered open, bright and clear. Uncle Ethan, I'm better, she cried. That's wonderful, Nora gasped, hugging her tight as tears ran down her cheeks. Uncle Jed exhaled a long sigh of relief. The monkey sat cross-legged, happily chugging peach juice. When it finished, it let out a tiny burp and started waving again. It says it wants more bananas and peach juice, Dot reported. You're insatiable, aren't you? Uncle Jed laughed. Ethan obliged, producing another armload. The monkey practically glowed with delight. Then it gestured again, looking earnest. Says, it wants to follow you, Dot said. Follow me? Ethan blinked. Yes. It says Uncle Ethan has the best food and it wants to stay with you, Dot said, her voice finally sounding stronger. You little schemer, Uncle Jed chuckled. All right. You can come along, Ethan said with a smile. The monkey squeaked in triumph, hopping in circles around him. Suddenly it pointed ahead, chittering excitedly. It says it wants to lead the way, Dot translated. Lead the way where? Ethan asked, puzzled. It says it knows where there's more good food. And treasures, Dot said, her eyes wide. This monkey really is a treasure hunter, Uncle Jed laughed. Then let's see what it has to show us, Ethan said, feeling a surge of hope. The monkey bounded ahead and the group set off again, following it deeper into the wilderness. 3 days later they arrived at a valley filled with the scent of flowers and birdsong. The monkey pointed deeper in, squeaking. It says there are many treasures and good food here, Dot translated. They followed it to a massive cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside, the darkness was so complete they could hardly see their own hands. Again the monkey gestured, insistent. It says there are many treasures here, Dot said. They pressed on, reaching a vast underground space lit by shimmering crystal formations. In the center was a clear lake, and on a small island rose an ancient stone altar covered in runes. The monkey pointed proudly at the altar. Says, "Many treasures." Whispered. Ethan approached the tablet, studying the strange markings. He couldn't decipher them. The monkey hopped up beside him and held out its hand again. "It wants bananas and peach juice." Sighed. "You little glutton," Ethan muttered, smiling despite himself. He pulled out the treats, and the monkey devoured them with obvious satisfaction. Then it gestured once more. "It says it still wants to follow you." Said. "You really don't give up," Ethan murmured. But when he glanced at the little creature, he couldn't help smiling. "All right, let's keep going," he said softly. The monkey's delighted chitter echoed off the stone walls as it bounded ahead again, leading them into the unknown. Chapter 370. The Ancient Guardian. The legendary elixir, the primal element seed, truly lived up to its reputation. Moments after Dot swallowed it, her complexion returned to normal, and a faint ethereal mist began to swirl around her body. Uncle Jed, watching this unfold, playfully nudged Nora. "Looks like you won't need me to make an appearance when you return to the Vance family this time." Nora was captivated by Dot's transformation, her heart swelling with relief and joy. The shimmering mist lingered a while longer before slowly receding back into Dot's body. No one could say for certain whether it had really connected her to the world's energy, but one thing was undeniable. Her headaches, convulsions, and all her other symptoms were gone. They rested there for a while, taking in the change and allowing Dot time to adjust. To Ethan's amusement, the monkey and Dot had become fast friends. Now the two were bickering over a dozen bottles of peach juice and several boxes of bananas he'd set out. "You said you only wanted 5. The rest are Dot's." Dot insisted, hugging the boxes to her chest. "Squeak, squeak, squeak." The monkey chattered back, waving its little arms. "I don't care. You said what you said, and I'll have Uncle Ethan put the rest away." Dot huffed. "Ugh." The monkey let out a long, pitiful whine. "No. Dot's all better now, and she doesn't want your seeds." She declared, her nose in the air. Their argument grew surprisingly heated, and everyone was astonished. Dot seemed to understand exactly what the monkey was saying. But it was her last remark that made Ethan's eyes light up. With a thought, he waved his hand, summoning a pile of fresh fruit. "Little monkey," he called, "how about I trade you all this for your seeds?" Squeak, squeak, squeak. The monkey launched into a flurry of animated gestures. Dot translated solemnly, "It says it's not a little monkey. It's a medicine spirit. And," she pointed toward the glowing ancient tree in the distance. "It says even if it gave you the seeds, you couldn't take them away. Without the protection of that great tree, everything here would turn to dust." Oh, Ethan thought. He'd assumed only the primal element seed was untouchable. But apparently everything here was connected to that tree. Without it, this entire place probably would have crumbled into ruins long ago. And this monkey, calling itself a medicine spirit, could it have once been a guardian of some sort of medicinal garden? Given the circumstances, there was nothing he could do. He let the idea drop. Everyone had eaten and rested enough, so he gathered them to continue their journey. Dot and the medicine spirit monkey exchanged reluctant goodbyes. Ethan didn't bother packing away the remaining fruits, they were too ordinary for him to care. He left them as a parting gift for the greedy little creature. As they drew nearer, Ethan finally grasped the true scale of the glowing ancient tree. Up close, its trunk was thousands of feet thick, and its vast canopy seemed to hold up the entire stone city above. In front of the colossal tree lay a small crystal-clear pond. A broad platform jutted out from the trunk itself, clearly built by the civilization or whatever race who once lived here. Staring up at the giant tree, Ethan felt no sign of life within it. The wood looked dead and withered, yet it radiated an immense natural power. It was as though the entire will of nature resided within that hollow shell. The group stepped onto the stone platform. Just then, the small sapling inside Ethan's body began to tremble. A strange aura drifted out of him. Ethan froze, staring as emerald green energy welled up from his core. As if guided by some invisible current, it shot directly into the great tree before them. But the air vibrated. The green light seeped into the tree's fibers like dye spreading through cloth. Veins of fresh bright green traced their way up the trunk and into the canopy above. Ethan could only watch, transfixed, as Uncle Jed, Nora, and Dot suddenly collapsed to the ground. Alarm shot through him. He stepped forward, about to check on them, when a resonant, ancient-sounding voice echoed around him. "Don't worry. They're fine. They're only asleep. Thank you for your gift, my king." The words seemed to come from the tree itself. "You?" Ethan's brows knit together. "It is I, my king. Would you be willing to step inside for a moment?" Even as the voice spoke, countless roots slid across the stone, weaving themselves into a staircase that curved gently toward Ethan's feet. He glanced back at Uncle Jed and the others. "My king, rest assured. Aside from that little monkey, nothing else remains here." This tree kept calling him king, and Ethan had no idea why. Was it because of the sprout growing inside him? He hesitated, but in the end curiosity outweighed caution. He stepped onto the staircase. Without waiting for him to climb further, it lifted and carried him upward. When he reached the level of the trunk, the wooden surface ahead shimmered like water. The staircase moved straight through it, delivering him into a vast hollow chamber within the tree. There an old man's face emerged from the wood itself. Only a face, his body long petrified, fused into the trunk around him. "My king, please be seated." A chair of interwoven vines rose behind Ethan, forming itself with uncanny precision. A table sprouted before him. Everything in the chamber smelled of resin and damp earth. "My king has bestowed upon me the power of origin," the old tray ant said. "I have nothing to repay you with save for my last essence, which I offer back to you." Ethan hadn't even spoken yet. A vine-woven goblet appeared on the table, filling instantly with a shimmering emerald liquid that smelled of grass and wood smoke. "What is this essence? And who are you? Why do you call me king?" he demanded, finally voicing the questions that had been burning in his mind. "I am merely a seed of your, well, you could say the world tree within you, left behind in this world. After countless ages, I too became the world tree of this realm." Ethan's pulse quickened. The world tree? That sprout inside me? He had always assumed it was a strange form of his energy core. Even when Morzan hinted at it, he'd never mentioned a name. "It seems my king is unaware of its true nature," the tray ant murmured. "I too don't understand why our world tree would grow within a human host. And moreover, a royal tree." He trailed off, lost in thought. After a moment, Ethan spoke again. "Can you tell me what the world tree actually is?" "Indeed," the old tray ant said gently. "Our world tree, strictly speaking, is not a lineage at all. In truth, there is only one of us, the one inside you. The others in different worlds are merely its branches, roots, or seeds. Our purpose is to maintain the balance of nature itself. I must have been asleep for tens of thousands of years. My life is nearly at its end. Once I perish completely, this world will soon follow. I speak only of this minor world." Ethan felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath him. That plump little sprout, he realized, was the one and only world tree across all realms. The others were simply extensions. Only the one within him could experience rebirth. The old tray ant before him had no such power. When it died, this world, the umbral star, would die too. Only planets with a world tree could birth countless species. So, was there one on Earth as well, hidden beyond anyone's knowledge? At last the tray ant gestured toward the goblet. "Please, my king, drink. My essence is no longer needed to sustain me. With your gift I will enter nirvana, transforming into a seed. This world will thrive again, perhaps for millions of years." Ethan hesitated, but the trent's calm conviction left him no room to argue. He lifted the goblet and drank. Ding. System notification. Completed the fortuitous quest, save the umbral star. Reward: Bloodline level +1. Ding. System notification. Completed the fortuitous quest, drink the world tree's essence. Reward: unknown. 2 notifications appeared in his mind. The first filled him with satisfaction, but the second, with its vague reward, unknown, was just annoying. He checked himself carefully, hoping the sprout might have grown larger, but it felt exactly the same. Sighing, he looked up. "Do you know where the Bloodline map is hidden in this city?" The tray ant smiled faintly. "I have slept for so long, I am not clear on recent events. But if such a thing lies here, you can ask that little monkey. And please take it with you. I am about to become a seed, and this dome will no longer stand." That monkey again, Ethan thought with a grimace. So he still had to coax the location out of it. As he pondered, the old trent's face sank back into the wood, growing still and gray. "Wait. I still wanted to ask how to get back to the surface." Ethan blurted, but it was too late. Silence filled the hollow chamber. He cursed under his breath and turned to leave. Without the staircase, he simply leapt down to the stone platform below. Outside, everything looked unchanged, though the glow of the ancient tree seemed dimmer. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The medicine spirit monkey came sprinting over, waving its arms and shrieking. Its eyes glistened with tears as it pointed frantically at the great tree. Ethan tried to explain, but the monkey's wailing only grew louder. He could see the hurt and anger in its expression. Clearly it believed he was to blame for the trent's passing. He sighed, trying to muster patience. He needed this creature's help to find the Bloodline map fragment. Without it, this city was vast, and without being able to use his soul sense, he might search the ruins for the rest of his life. Chapter 371. The World Tree's Legacy. The little monkey was jumping up and down in front of Ethan, practically throwing a tantrum. Just as he was at a loss for what to do, the entire city began to change again. Countless specks of light burst forth from the ground in the shape of seeds. More and more appeared, forming a shimmering river of stars overhead. It swept across the sky, circling the ancient tree at the heart of the ruins. In that instant, Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He sensed a deep attachment within, and at the same time an endless sorrow. This Uncle Jed, Nora, and Dot all woke up then. They didn't know what was happening, but each of them stood frozen, stunned by the magnificent sight before them. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The little monkey finally stopped its incessant wailing. It knelt down before the massive ancient tree. But it wasn't only this place undergoing a transformation. All across the umbral star the world was changing. Animals lifted their heads to wail in grief. Plants drooped their branches as if mourning. Every living thing felt it. Their lives had been born from this tree, and now it was about to grow old. Though it radiated a comforting aura gently assuring the world that it was not dying, only undergoing a kind of nirvana and rebirth, no one knew whether the reborn tree would ever be the same again. And while the various intelligent races had awakened to higher consciousness, they had lost their instinctive perception. Whether that was a blessing or a tragedy remained unclear. A voice resonated inside Ethan's mind. Words no one else seemed able to hear. "My king, thank you for granting me life once again. This is my final gratitude to you. Go forth, my children. And you little monkey, follow the king and leave this place." Uncle Jed and the others didn't react at all, but Ethan's heart thumped. In the next moment, the series of stars reversed direction and surged toward him. The lights poured into his lower abdomen, one after another, coiling around the core within. As more of the colorful seeds settled there, they slowly began to orbit the sprout of the world tree in his body. A vibrant, shifting nebula appeared. Ethan's core trembled, and the previously chaotic swirl of energy suddenly aligned itself to some unknown law. He sucked in a sharp breath. It was like watching a new world come to life. Ethan chuckled, almost giddy. After all this time, he finally had a core. He couldn't help wondering what Morzan would say if he saw it. Morzan had always claimed Ethan would never be able to bear a core no matter how hard he tried. Speaking of which, he realized he hadn't heard from Morzan since arriving here. Maybe they were truly in different worlds. He wondered how Lila was doing. Checking the time, he jolted. He'd been here for days, but the system time showed only a few minutes had passed. Damn. 5 days here, only 7 minutes there? He slapped his forehead. They probably hadn't even noticed yet. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Uncle Jed asked, frowning when he saw him smack himself. Even Nora was eyeing him like he'd lost his mind. Nothing." Ethan's face flushed. He looked up at the ancient tree still glowing softly and bowed in his heart. "If we ever meet again, I hope you have grown anew." Beside him, the little monkey stared blankly from Ethan to the tree. Ethan crouched down and smiled. "Come with me. It's not dead, it's undergoing nirvana. You'll get to see it again." The monkey scratched its head, looking bewildered. Ethan patted its fluffy head. "I'll give you a name. I'll call you." Before he could finish, Dot piped up, "Call him Fluffy." Dot already thought of it. Squeak, squeak. Ethan was taken aback. The name was definitely fitting. This medicine spirit monkey really was fluffy. Its fur so long it nearly brushed the ground. Even the back of its head was hidden under that thick hair. Its little legs were buried in it entirely. "You don't want it?" "Fluffy sounds great," he said, trying to persuade it. But the monkey's squeak squeak was clearly a protest aimed at Dot. Ethan's eyes darted around. He stood up straighter, trying to project an air of authority. In a deep, formal voice, he declared, "Today I bestow upon you the name." He paused for effect. Everyone stared, caught by his solemn tone. "The name? Little Empty." "Ah?" Ethan froze. That was not what he meant to say. "H." Uncle Jed scoffed, unimpressed. He'd clearly expected something majestic. Nora burst out laughing, and Dot shook her head. "Fluffy sounds better." Ethan's eyes went wide. He'd been about to say Sun Wukong. How did Little Empty come out instead? "Ahem. I misspoke," he said, quickly clearing his throat. "Let's try that again." He raised his hand and began once more. "Today I bestow upon you the name. Little Empty." "Damn it!" He cursed silently as everyone's faces fell. He refused to give up. "Today I bestow upon you the name. Little Empty." He practically roared each word, but no matter how hard he tried, the same name came out. Dot was clutching her stomach, laughing so hard she could hardly breathe. Uncle Jed was rubbing his forehead like he was embarrassed to be seen with him. Nora wiped tears of laughter from the corners of her eyes. Even the little monkey stared up at Ethan with wide, exasperated eyes before waving its hand, as if to say, "I get it, you don't have to keep repeating it." Only Ethan understood what was happening. Could those fictitious myths be true? Was there really a powerful being whose title was forbidden for others to use? But no, that was ridiculous. Back on Earth, there were plenty of people named after powerful figures, and nothing ever happened to them. Unwilling to believe in superstition, he tried again. "All right, let's forget the name. I'll bestow a title instead. Something impressive so you'll sound important when you're out and about." He took a deep breath. "You shall be called Great Sage Little." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew something was wrong. Even the title he had in mind wouldn't come out properly. But Great Sage Little wasn't the worst thing in the world. Ethan glanced around and realized everyone looked like they were about to faint from laughing. He decided to change the subject as fast as possible. Little Empty, have you seen this before? He pulled out a piece of leather parchment, the single fragment of the Bloodline map he carried. Uncle Jed and the others slowly sobered when they saw Ethan was finally asking something serious. Little Empty took the fragment, turning it over in its hands and sniffing it. Squeak, squeak. Ethan looked helplessly at Dot. It says it hasn't seen this shape before. Translated, but it does have a piece with a similar scent. Ethan's eyes lit up. Where is it? This is very important to me. Take me to get it and you can have all the fruit you want. Little Empty's ears perked up, but then it hesitated, wringing its tiny hands. What's wrong? Ethan asked, glancing at Dot. I don't know, it hasn't said anything. At last the monkey seemed to reach a decision. Squeak, squeak. Says, you have to keep your word. Translated. I promise, Ethan said at once. Little Empty took a deep breath, looking extremely reluctant. It lifted the long fur covering its body, reached into its crotch, and pulled out a tattered parchment. Ethan took an involuntary step back. Little Empty stepped forward, holding it out with both hands. Ethan's eyes widened, unsure what to do. When the monkey had lifted its fur, he'd clearly seen it was wearing a loincloth, and that loincloth was the parchment in question. The legendary lost fifth fragment of the Bloodline map. Squeak, squeak. Is asking you, do you want it or not? Dot said carefully. Ethan's face twisted in pure conflicted horror. Of course he wanted it, but who knew how long the monkey had been wearing it? Hundreds, maybe thousands of years? He swallowed hard. He and Little Empty stared at each other, locked in silent agony. Finally, with no better options, Ethan extended a trembling hand and pinched the tiniest corner. The second he felt it, he flung it into his inventory. Ding. System notification. Main quest: explore the ancient ruins completed. Ding. System notification. Obtained Bloodline map fragment X1. Phew. Ethan let out a long, exhausted breath. Thank you, Little Empty. He reached out and patted the monkey's head discreetly, wiping his fingers clean in its fur. All right, we should head out. How we're getting back to the surface is still a problem. As he spoke, Uncle Jed stepped forward, his expression serious. Ethan, how did you know there was a fragment of the Bloodline map here? If I'm not mistaken, that should be the most mysterious fifth fragment. The Sea of Death has been so stable precisely because it was lost. All four cities know that even if they steal each other's fragments, the map would stay incomplete. But if word gets out, the peace of the Sea of Death might end. Ethan waved a hand dismissively. What's there to be afraid of? At worst, I'll just unite the Sea of Death, so what? Ding. System notification. Triggered ultimate quest: conquer the Sea of Death. Quest reward. Ability scroll. Immortality. Divine. Dot. What? Holy crap. Ah. 3 different voices broke the silence. Uncle Jed and Nora gaped at Ethan, stunned by his words. The holy crap was all Ethan. He'd been convinced all this time that collecting the Bloodline map was the only main quest. The final reward was supposed to be the Immortality divine ability. After all, that was the trial quest he'd been sent on by the Blood King. He never imagined a single offhand remark would trigger an ultimate quest. With his heart pounding, he opened the quest panel. Quest name: Conquer the Sea of Death. Quest requirement: unite the 4 main cities. Hurricane City 0 to 1. Beastfall City 0 out of 1. Forgotten City 0 out of 1. Clear Spring City 0 to 1. Quest duration: within the trial quest time limit. Quest reward: ability scroll, Immortality, divine. Ethan stared, confirming the system wasn't messing with him. Damn. This just got serious. How vast was the Sea of Death? Forget uniting it, just traveling between the 4 cities would take ages. There were no planes, no high-speed trains, and his Predator Beast X had been totaled. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.